Chapter 318. Zhao Guangwu didn't expect Zhang Yan to make a move just like that. He couldn't help but be shocked when he heard it. In a hurry, he stepped on the smoke and retreated. At the same time, a sword pellet flew out. In an instant, it drew out a golden arc light and blocked the star's sword pellet that was flying towards him. Then, with a spell, he turned into a rainbow light and flew far away. He was also proficient in swordsmanship. When he was a disciple of Luo Qixin, he often sparred with Luo Yuanhua. He knew that when two swordsmen were fighting, if one of them made the first move, the other would not be in a hurry to counterattack. Instead, he would think of ways to get out of the battle circle and avoid the storm-like attacks. After stabilizing his footing, he would then talk about other things. Although Zhang Yan didn't know his plan, he had never fought with a swordsman like Zhao Guangwu before. Now that he suddenly encountered him, he was delighted to see a hunter and naturally wouldn't miss such a good opportunity. Even if this person made a move to give way, he wouldn't let it go easily. Similarly, he turned into a rainbow and chased after him with his sword. Two rainbow lights chased in the sky. Both were as fast as lightning and as fast as flying stars. In the blink of an eye, they were already a few miles away. Zhao Guangwu had practiced swordsmanship since he was young and was confident in his swordsmanship. In his opinion, although Zhang Yan was also famous for the oblique path, he might not be able to be mentioned in the same breath as him. That was why he was full of confidence before this. However, he was surprised to find that the speed of the other's sword escape was not much slower than his bow. In fact, it was even slightly faster. Seeing this, his gaze froze, but he didn't panic. With a shout, he urged the sword light. The escape lights suddenly became fast and slow, left and right, making it hard for others to figure out where he was going. After flashing dozens of times, he arrived at the top of a mountain. Then, he looked for the gaps between the rocks to pass through, and after a few rounds, he finally pulled away from the sword light behind him. Then, he turned around and stood in the air. With a shout, he shook the sword pellet open, and in an instant, 12 wheels of sword light formed into a crescent moon wheel and flashed out. He had heard that Zhang Yan could use 16 swords in one breath, but he didn't think much of it. According to what he knew, Zhang Yan was the same as him. They had not learned the superior sword manual, so they couldn't fully display the power of the technique. However, he was slightly different. Not only did he know the light separation and reunion technique, he often sparred with his fellow sword cultivators when he was in the Luo clan, so he had rich battle experience. Even if he was short of a few sword beams, he was confident that he could use his exquisite sword skills to make up for it. The corner of his mouth curled up slightly. With a command of his mind, the sword rays separated and reunited, gathering and dispersing at the same time. It seemed as though it was expanding and contracting at the same time. It kept jumping around Zhang Yan's body, looking for an opportunity to attack the enemy. As long as he could find an opening, he would be able to kill his way in. Seeing that Zhao Guangwu was actually able to create 12 swords in one breath, Zhang Yan was not surprised, but happy instead. He exclaimed in his heart, and with a clear whistle, he also spread out his sword light. A total of 16 sword shadows flew out at the same time, transforming into streaks of dancing light that protected him. It was rare to meet a fellow practitioner. He wanted to observe the person's sword skills, so he wasn't in a rush to attack. He only focused on defense. Now that he was wearing treasured clothes and had cultivated the divine contract to the third realm, even if his opponent had a killer move, he was not afraid of killing him. Seeing that Zhang Yan was trapped by him, Zhao Guangwu couldn't help but look happy. He and Zhang Yan were from the same sect, and they didn't invite each other with a duel invitation. This battle could only be considered as a spar, and he wouldn't be able to explain who was injured. Therefore, he only hoped that he could defeat Zhang Yan and force him to admit defeat. With that, Zhang Yan wouldn't have the face to compete for victory in the tournament. Therefore, he did not hesitate to instigate his true essence and drove the sword pill like rain. A golden rain-like brilliance wrapped around a layer of starlight and poured down from every orifice, as if it was trying its best to crush it. Although the shuttle-like starlight was a size smaller than the resplendent silver light, it was extremely tenacious. Under the constant pressure, it repeatedly changed shape. Although it looked like charcoal and was in danger, it was still able to deal with it. The two colors of brilliance collided with each other and created a pleasing sound. It was like the sound of a zither and could be heard dozens of miles away. Unknowingly, an hour had passed in this battle between the two. Zhang Yan's breathing was long and continuous, and his dan was vigorous, but he did not feel anything. On the other hand, Zhao Guangwu was unable to break through the net of swords several times. Entering the net of swords, he felt slightly tired. He was secretly shocked and said, "This Zhang Yan is still calm and composed, and does not seem to be strained at all. I heard that he has achieved the first grade of his dan. Is the after effect really so endless? Do you think I'm easy to bully?" He pointed with his hand, and the sword light lengthened to attack Zhao Guangwu again. Zhao Guangwu frowned. He had a sword concealment technique that could hide him from the side and suddenly attack. However, he had to wait for the right time to use this technique. If the other party was on guard, it wouldn't be easy to use it. He originally planned to use words to scare Zhang Yan into thinking that he was really retreating, and when he was careless, he would make a surprise attack. He didn't expect the other party to not fall for it. Seeing the sword light coming, he had no choice but to pull himself together to deal with it. This time, Zhang Yan didn't plan to hold back. The sword light collided, and after blocking the other's body, he continued to unleash his sword force. Zhao Guangwu wasn't in the mood to fight for a long time. After he dealt with a few moves, he found a flaw and used the same trick again to escape. However, how could Zhang Yan let him escape so easily? He had only wanted to take a look at his sword move, so he didn't use his full strength. Now that he saw that the other wanted to escape, he immediately gave a clear shout and became one with his sword. He turned into a ray of light and suddenly rushed to the front, slashing down with his sword. The separation and reunion splitting light technique was very useful against people who didn't know the sword path, but it wasn't so easy against people like Zhao Guangwu. Therefore, he displayed his strong points and didn't play around with any exquisite moves. He just relied on his sword escape technique to be faster than the other party, not allowing him to unleash his sword force. Zhao Guangwu saw that the sword light was swift and unstoppable. If he didn't handle it well, he definitely wouldn't be able to escape. He had no choice but to stop and parry again. After dealing with it for a while, he felt the pressure increase greatly. Because Zhang Yan kept circling around him, the sword light moved and flashed, attacking from tricky places every time, making him unable to deal with it. If he continued to fight like this, he only needed to be careless and he would lose. How could he dare to take such a risk? He immediately shouted and scattered the sword pellet, turning it into 12 sword lights that forced the star's sword pellet back. Then, he impatiently flew away. However, he hadn't run far when he saw a flash of light in front of him. Zhang Yan appeared in front of him again. With a long howl, he drove his sword to slash like before. When the sword light flew over, it was like a meteor chasing after the moon. The cold air overflowed and pierced into the bones, forcing Zhao Guangwu to deal with it first. After stabilizing his footing, he also knew that he had been too hasty earlier, so he didn't leave in a hurry. Instead, he attacked for a while. Zhang Yan smiled to himself, and with a wave of his sword light, he managed to block this round of attacks. When Zhao Guangwu saw that he had gained a slight upper hand, he secretly took a step back. Suddenly, he cast a spell and flew away. Zhang Yan sneered. He had long been prepared for this and executed his sword escape at almost the same time. In a few breaths' time, he caught up again and slashed down with his sword just like before. Zhao Guangwu saw that he still couldn't escape and couldn't help cursing in his heart. He had no choice but to stop again. After a few times, he also knew that it would be difficult to escape today. Although he was also a sword cultivator, he also felt annoyed by Zhang Yan's fighting style. He felt that his hands and feet were tied. He obviously had a body's strength, but he couldn't use it. When the two of them fought, the sword light came and went at a rapid speed. There was no room for distraction. It was also because his previous attack was too fast that it caused him to consume too much of his vitality. At this moment, his mood suddenly fluctuated. If it was at full power, it wouldn't be considered much, but at this moment, it caused a slight gap in the sword net, and it was immediately noticed by Zhang Yan. Zhang Yan's eyes suddenly flashed and he gave a low shout. The star's sword pellet instantly split into 16 sword lights. They didn't spread out, but concentrated in a narrow area to kill. Zhao Guangwu was shocked when he suddenly used this move. Fortunately, he reacted quickly and shook off the sword light. Relying on his exquisite sword skill, he was able to block it. At this time, Zhang Yan saw the opportunity and with a flick of his finger, 6 drops of serene heavy water shot out like a string of pearls. In his haste, Zhao Guangwu didn't know what it was. At this moment, the power of the sword was gone and he didn't have time to turn around to block, so he used his Dan Sha to protect himself. However, each drop of this heavy water weighed thousands of pounds. It was not something the Dan Sha could defend against in a hurry. All of them landed heavily on his chest and shoulders. In an instant, the bones in his ribs and shoulders were all shattered. He spat out a mouthful of blood and screamed. He used the last shred of consciousness he had to cast the spell to save his life. His body turned into a ray of sword light and disappeared in a flash. Target =_blank. Chapter 319. In an elegant building in the south, the Wang sisters, Tian Kun, and Li Guozhi sat behind a table. From time to time, they would comment on the people fighting below. Beside them, there were a few female attendants serving tea and water, as well as constantly serving immortal wine. After the deacon found out that they were Zhang Yan's disciples, how could he dare to ask for any benefits? He respectfully led them to this fine building. Because he was afraid that they would slow down, he would come and take a look from time to time. Every time, he would sternly order the maids to not slack off at all. Li Guozhi saw the deacons change from arrogance to deference and lamented the unfairness. His master's cultivation wasn't high, so no one bothered with him. However, the Wang sisters were Zhang Yan's disciples. Even if they didn't say anything, no one dared to offend them. These few days of watching the competition between the disciples of the sect, the Wang sisters' horizons had been broadened. Only now did they realize that there were so many talented people in the sect. There were many people with talent that wasn't any worse than theirs. Now that they were a step ahead of them, if they didn't do their best to catch up, they would forever be left behind. Thus, they made up their minds to cultivate properly after returning to the sect. Wang Kaiwei saw that the deacon was scolding people on the side. From time to time, he would glance in their direction as if he was afraid that they couldn't hear him. She found it funny and stood up. "Deacon, please come and sit here. My daughter has something to ask." When the deacon heard this, he hurried over and bowed. "Junior sister Wang, please speak. I will tell you everything I know." Wang Kaiwei smiled and said, "I still need to ask Deacon Pai. What kind of rewards will the sect have for tomorrow's Mystic Light competition?" In these 20 days, a clear Qi realm disciple called Hua Pengcheng won first place. Not only did the sect give him a true palace to cultivate in, but they also gave him a high-quality spirit artifact, a mystic art manual, and 25 bottles of supplementary pills. They also gave him access to the high-brightness temple to listen to Tao lectures. His future could be said to be limitless. After today, it would be the battle between the mystic light realms. The deacon Daoist knew everything about the competition like the back of his hand, so he said, "I'll let the 2 junior sisters know. I heard that the top 60 disciples of the mystic light realm will not only be rewarded with a blessed land, but they will also be able to get a concubine from their sect. As for the top 3, not only will they be rewarded with the 3 herbs needed to condense their core, but they will also be able to choose one of the 5 arts and 3 scriptures to cultivate." The Wang sisters nodded repeatedly as they listened, but their expressions did not change. They had just entered the sect to cultivate, and their cultivation was not high enough, so they did not understand what this external medicine cultivation method meant. They thought that it was similar to what the Ming Qi disciple had bestowed, so they did not feel anything and just listened. Tian Kun was the same. He sat there quietly. At first, Li Guizhi thought that he was being arrogant. Later, he found out that he didn't like to talk, so he didn't come to provoke him. However, Li Guizhi was different from them. He interacted with far more people than the Wang sisters. His master had gone out for a period of time to search for the herbs needed to condense the core. It had been 22 to 23 years, and he had finally found all of them. Li Guizhi knew how rare these external medicines were. When he heard that the sect had bestowed such things, he couldn't help but think to himself, just a mystic light realm disciple is already so generous. If it's a core formation cultivator, they will definitely receive a lot more. Only if my cultivation increases will I be able to receive more. Just now, he secretly glanced at the Wang sisters. Originally, he had only approached the two girls because of their outstanding appearance. Everyone loved beauty, and he had not been a disciple for long, so he had not yet gotten rid of such mortal habits. But now, he no longer had such thoughts. If he wanted to cultivate, he had to have a partner, wealth, and a place. He originally thought that even though he had many people in the sect, his master wasn't bad. He didn't think that the deacon Taoist would treat him so differently from the Wang sisters. It was like a heavy blow to him. Thus, he decided to have a good relationship with these two sisters and see if anyone would dare to look down on him in the future. Among the disciples of the mystic light realm, the disciples of the Xianmen families are the most impressive. The Taoist deacon continued to talk non-stop, his eyebrows dancing as he spoke. But among the disciples of the master, in the past 20 years, the two disciples who have been promoted to the position of elder Zhu in the Ming Temple are Wang Ziyuan and Yuan Yanhui. Wang Keting's expression changed. She had heard Lu Yenny mention this Yuan Yanhui before. She said with surprise, "Ah, this elder Zhu is really good at teaching disciples." When Li Guizhi heard this, he coughed. Wang Keting looked over and said, Taoist Li, what's wrong?" Li Guizhi quickly said, Nothing. I just choked on some tea." He thought to himself, Elder Yuan's skills aren't bad, but how bad can the disciples of estate Lord Zhang be? I heard that the Wang sisters' senior sister, Lu Yenny, has only cultivated for 20 years and has already entered the mystic light realm. She's already famous. If I had a choice, I would be willing to become estate Lord Zhang's disciple. Elder Yuan has already lived for over 500 years. In a few more decades, his lifespan will be up. Without someone to rely on, how far can Yuan and Wang go, no matter how talented they are? When Wang Kaiwei heard Yuan Yanhui's name, she couldn't help but say, I wonder if eldest senior sister can beat this person this time. Wang Keting's eyes shifted. She nudged Tian Kun, who hadn't spoken for a long time, and said, Second senior brother, what do you think? Tian Kun thought about it seriously and said, Eldest senior sister has followed master for the longest time and has the sword pill. I think she won't be too bad. Wang Keting pouted unhappily. Didn't that mean she didn't say anything? Right at this moment, a clear profound light flew over from the sky and circled around the mountain wall a few times, as if it was looking for someone. Wang Keting's eyes were sharp, and she saw it at a glance. She said happily, It's eldest senior sister. She jumped up and waved her hand, shouting, Eldest senior sister, I'm waiting here. The ray of light turned and flew over. When it reached the pavilion, the light dissipated and Lu Yenny walked out. Her appearance was elegant and elegant. She wore a deep pink robe with long sleeves that dragged on the ground and golden rings around her waist. The rings made a light sound as she walked, and the light under her knees hadn't dissipated yet. When she walked in from the pavilion, the bright moon behind her made her look like a fairy that had descended to the mortal world. Li Guizhi was stunned. The Wang sisters and Tian Kun quickly stood up and bowed. Greetings, eldest senior sister. Lu Yenny opened her red lips and said gently, Junior brother Tian, junior sisters, no need to be so polite. She turned her eyes again, looking at Li Guozhi, saying, I wonder who this is. Li Guozhi just now came back to his senses. He quickly tidied up his clothes and bowed, I am Immortaling Island's Li Guozhi. Greetings, Fairy Lu. Immortaling Island. Lu Yenni's eyes flashed with a trace of reminiscence as she nodded. At this time, in a pavilion not far from them, there were two Taoists drinking wine and enjoying themselves. One of the Taoists with a tall crown was already drunk. When he saw Lu Yenni's flight light, he asked a short cultivator, Junior Marshal Brother Wang, look at that female cultivator. Her mystic light is so pure and rare. Do you know where she came from? The short cultivator took a look and said nonchalantly, from her appearance, she should be Lu Yenni. Her talent is high, it's normal for her to have such achievements. The Taoist frowned and put down his wine cup, is she the Lu Yenni that junior nephew Yuan mentioned? The one that almost stole her sword pellet on Ingluo Island? The short cultivator nodded, that's right, that's her. Lu Yenni looked up and saw that the person who attacked was a person from Daoren with a head full of white hair. He had a goatee and a thin face. He wore a rainbow-colored robe and sat on the flying couch. There were two disciples behind him. At this moment, he also turned around and looked at Lu Yenni. He said in a deep voice, are you Lu Yenni? Chapter 320. This Daoren had a serious demeanor, and his aura was thick and powerful. As he sat there, everyone in the room felt suffocated. Lu Yenni did not know this person's identity, so she replied cautiously, I am Lu Yenni. How should I address you? One of the disciples behind the old Taoist stood up and shouted, how dare you? This is the elder of Shangming Temple. Hurry up and greet him. Lu Yenni did not move. She smiled and said, it is not difficult for me to greet him. My master is Chancellor Zhou of Danding Courtyard. May I ask how I should address you and my master? The old Taoist frowned slightly. Zhou Chengju was 2 generations older than him. If that was the case, wouldn't Lu Yenni have to be the same generation as him? How could that be? Therefore, he changed the topic and said, a great teacher produces a great disciple. My disciple, Yan Hui, often mentions you in front of me, Daoren. Seeing you today, you are indeed extraordinary. Lu Yenni's heart skipped a beat and she asked, is it Elder Zhu? Daoren nodded slightly. Lu Yenni bowed and said, so it is Elder Zhu. Yenni greets you. Although Elder Zhu was not well known in the sect before, he gradually became known after his 2 disciples, Wang Zhiyuan and Yuan Yan, showed their outstanding talents one after another. The reason why he was here was because he had received a report that his good-for-nothing junior brother had come to cause trouble for Zhang Yan's disciple. Fearing that a conflict would arise, he had rushed here in a hurry. Fortunately, he had arrived in time to put a stop to the matter so that it would not cause any trouble in the future. He had also heard of Zhang Yan's past. He was quite fearful of him. It should be known that Zhang Yan's core had reached the 1st grade. As long as there were no accidents, he would most likely enter the Yuanying realm. He was now 562 years old, and his lifespan was coming to an end. It could be imagined that if he offended Zhang Yan for no reason, he could still handle it now. But if he left in another 20 or 30 years, the 2 disciples he left behind would be in trouble. Not only that, he always hoped that after he reincarnated, he would have the opportunity to enter the celestial sect of wonders to recultivate. If his disciple couldn't even take care of himself, how would he have the leisure to care about his affairs? Thus, he'd stopped paying attention to his cultivation in the last few tens of years, and he'd placed all his energy on his 2 disciples. If it was possible, he still wanted to help them find all the medicines needed to condense the core and help the 2 of them reach the core transformation stage before his lifespan ended. With this thought in mind, he naturally didn't want any accidents to happen during this period. After chatting with Lu Yenni for a while, he couldn't help but praise her in his heart when he saw that she had a calm expression and answered fluently, just like a disciple of a famous sect. Chapter 321. In the valley, there was a mess of lights that flickered. A red and a green conveyance light fought fiercely in the air. From time to time, they would collide with each other and create colorful lights. However, at this moment, the green light was already in danger, but it seemed to be unwilling to give up and was still struggling. After a while, the green light was finally defeated. Then, the red light spread out and a tall Taoist appeared. He stood in the air, panting. Although his body was trembling slightly, his eyes were filled with excitement. After he stabilized his breath, he turned and went to the top of a mountain. There was an elder of the Shangming temple standing on it. The elder nodded at him and said in a deep voice, "Wu Yinming, you have won this round. You can go and take the jade talisman to pass, but remember, you have to go to Rongyu Peak tomorrow morning at the latest." Wu Yinming pressed down the cloud and bowed respectfully to the elder. He said, "Disciple will remember." Then, he walked a few steps to the side. There was a flat bluestone there, and there were more than 10 strange-shaped jade talisman on it. He glanced at them and didn't dare to look at them anymore. He waved his hand and took a jade talisman. Then, he bowed to the elder and hurriedly flew away. This time, the competition between the Xian Light sect disciples was not like the competition between the Ming Qi sect disciples. Instead, a formation was set up on the 19 peaks of the Honglai continent. The disciples of the sect had to kill their way through and obtain the jade talisman on the peak. Only then would they have the right to enter the next peak. If they failed 3 times, they would be expelled from this place and would no longer have the right to compete. On top of every peak, there was an elder of the Shangming temple who would arrange for the disciples to compete. However, every elder's temperament and preferences were different, so there were a lot of tricks. If they encountered those with strange temperaments, they would arrange 4 or 5 people to fight in one place. There were even some who would pick dozens of disciples to fight. Whether they could pass or not depended on their own luck. On the 19th peak, there were only 3 jade talisman on the peak. In other words, the most generous reward of the sect would only be obtained by 3 people in the end. Wu Yinming's luck was quite good. For 4 days in a row, he passed 4 trials in a row, and each time, he only encountered one opponent. He descended from the peak and saw a Taoist palace embedded in the mountain wall from afar. This was a place for the disciples to rest, so he used the traveling light to head inside. When he arrived at the main hall, a deacon Taoist came up to check the jade talisman. After checking that there was no mistake, he waved his hand coldly and allowed him to enter just now. Wu Yinming heaved a sigh of relief. After he quickly stepped into the building, he swept his gaze around and saw that there were already dozens of disciples sitting upright in the spacious hall. He took a deep breath and came to an empty corner. He sat down on a praying mat and took out a few pills to consume. Then, he sat down and began to meditate. He didn't dare to relax in the slightest. Today, he was already having a hard time dealing with it. The opponents he would encounter on the mountain peaks later would only become stronger and stronger. If he couldn't recover to his peak state before tomorrow morning, he would have to be at his peak state. Otherwise, it was very likely that he would be defeated. At this moment, the disciples around him were like him. No one was distracted, and no one looked at him. They were all using every bit of time to recover their vitality. When the sun rose, the disciples just now had all recovered their vitality. After waking up from their meditation, a few acquaintances greeted each other. Wu Yinming's energy was completely recovered. When he opened his eyes, he heard someone say, "Senior Marshal Brother Zhong, did you hear that someone broke into the first 5 peaks yesterday? Now that a night has passed, they might have already killed their way to the first 3 peaks." That Senior Marshal Brother Zhong obviously hadn't heard of this and was extremely shocked. What? Where did Junior Marshal Brother Qi hear of this? It's only been 4 days, who could be so powerful? Someone couldn't help but interrupt, who else? It's nothing more than those true disciples. No, the person who spoke earlier shook his head like a rattle drum. Other than those true disciples, there are a few powerful figures in my lineage that aren't inferior to anyone else. A disciple curiously asked, Who are those senior martial brothers? As soon as he asked this, a female disciple was immediately unconvinced and said, from what this senior martial brother said, it seems that only you male disciples can break through the arrays. Junior martial sister, let me tell you, that Yuan Yen passed through 8 arrays on the first day, 5 on the second day, and 3 on the third day. Today is already the 4th day, I'm afraid she's already 1 step away from the first peak. Also, that Zhang Yan, House Lord Zhang's disciple, Lu Yenny, I heard that she only passes 4 arrays every day, but every time she's undefeated. Presumably, after tonight, she'll also step into the first 3 peaks tomorrow. Hearing Zhang Yan's name, Wu Yinming's expression couldn't help but change. On the day of the Battle of the 3 Lakes, his life was saved by Zhang Yan on Bamboo Island, and he had always been secretly grateful. Now that he heard that Zhang Yan's disciple was also in this competition, he couldn't help but pay extra attention. However, that jealous person snorted coldly and said, "What's hard is easy to break. Be careful, the faster you charge, the harder you fall." Wu Yinming grinned. Although this person's words had a hint of jealousy, it wasn't without reason. If a disciple charged too far ahead and there were no other disciples of the same generation to fight with them, then they would have to face the elders of the Shangming Temple. Although these elders were at the mystic light realm like them, all of them had cultivated for more than 100 years. Whether it was battle experience or familiarity with the Tao, they were far above them. They were indeed not easy to deal with. It wasn't that the disciples at the back didn't have people with high cultivation, but they all tried their best to avoid fighting with the elders of the Shangming Temple. They would rather be a few days slower than take the risk easily. At this moment, on the 16th peak, sword lights were flying and circling. Lu Yenny was fighting many people alone, and she was in the middle of a fierce battle with several direct disciples. She let out a clear shout, and the sword light shook like a jade pearl falling off its chain, scattering down. The people around her were all forced back by the flickering sword light, and when they were about to attack again, she activated the technique, and the sword light split into a circle of brilliance. This circle of brilliance shook repeatedly, and then it split into 5 clear lights that were like the moon, and they revolved endlessly in midair, reflecting a dazzling brilliance that dazzled the eyes of those who looked at it, and it was too much for the eyes to take in. These direct disciples surrounded Lu Yenny, but they couldn't get the upper hand at all. Instead, they were forced back by Lu Yenny using the wonders of the sword to escape, and they were extremely dispirited. At this moment, they didn't know what kind of changes were happening in the sword, and they had no choice but to retreat again. Just now, when they looked again, they saw 6 sword shadows moving and flashing. They were all shocked, and they said in shock, "Separation and reunion technique?" One of them saw it, and he didn't want to fight anymore, so he simply turned around and left. The remaining few were unwilling to give up, and they still wanted to struggle. They looked at each other, and after greeting each other, they gritted their teeth and rushed forward again. But how could this separation and reunion technique be so easy to deal with? Under Lu Yenny's sharp sword lights, these people were defeated very quickly. After a few rounds, they jumped out of the battle ring one by one, and gave up. After forcing the last disciple off the cloud, Lu Yenny stepped on the light, put away her sword, and stood up. After fighting a few people, she still looked relaxed, and her clothes were not wrinkled, and there was not a speck of dust on them. The guardian elder of this peak stroked his beard and sighed, "I have underestimated you. With a sword in hand, you are already in an invincible position, and you have also comprehended the separation and reunion technique, so you can advance and retreat, attack and defend. Even if there are more people, I'm afraid they won't be able to defeat you." Lu Yenny bowed, and said, "I still have to thank this elder for taking care of me." The elder shook his head with a bitter smile, and said, "I didn't take care of you, the younger generation will surpass the older. Take the jade talisman, and quickly go." Lu Yenny raised her wrist lightly, and took the jade talisman that was placed on the blue stone into her hand. Her beautiful eyes glanced at it, and she bowed to the elder again before flying into the sky. When she arrived on top of the cloud, she circled around, and found a place that was illuminated in the sky. Then, she urged her escape light to rush there. At this moment, Zhang Yan was sitting on a flying couch with his back leaning against a green jade screen carved with beasts. White smoke was like mist under his feet, as if immortal clouds were lingering around him. He was holding a glass wine cup in his hand and drinking by himself. Not far away, a few core formation cultivators raised their cups to him from time to time. Zhang Yan smiled and raised his cup in return. After watching the battles for a few days, he also saw the figures of a few former disciples of the lower house. After not seeing them for more than 20 years, he had already left these people far behind. Lu Yenny flew over an array of escape light, and in a flash, she landed in front of the couch. She put her hand on her waist, lowered her head slightly, and curtsied, and said, "Disciple greets master." Zhang Yan smiled, and with a wave of his sleeve, he said, "Disciple, you may dispense with the formalities, sit down and talk." Lu Yenny hurriedly lowered her head, and said, "There is no seat in front of master." Zhang Yan did not force her, and only said with a smile, "Yenny, you didn't come to master's place for the past 3 days, but you came here today. Did you meet a powerful opponent?" Lu Yenny nodded lightly, and said, "Indeed, disciple was just about to ask master for advice." Although disciple met a few true disciples these few days, it was easy for me to deal with them. But today, I met someone who was holding dozens of golden nails, and when they were shot out, the sound was like thunder, and within 30 feet, they were as fast as lightning, and none of them hit their target. Relying on this treasure, this person defeated dozens of disciples in a row, and almost no one could match him. Disciple privately thought that if this person only relied on these golden nails, there was nothing to fear, but if he also had a talisman to protect him, and it could be used both offensively and defensively, it would be extremely difficult to defeat him. Along the way, she had always used borrowed strength to fight against enemies, and did not use any talisman. That was because she did not want to expose all her methods in front of everyone, so that her opponent would not be able to see through her, and she would be prepared in advance. And this competition would definitely be decided on the last peak, and those who could make it there were all talented people in the sect, and no one was stupid. If she could come up with such an idea, the other disciples would definitely have a few tricks up their sleeves as well. They would not reveal all of their cards. When Zhang Yan heard this, he laughed and said, "I know what you're worried about. This person already has the golden nail in his hand. If he also has a treasured robe to protect him, it really won't be easy to break him. However, in my opinion, this is a small matter. I don't have much, but I do have quite a few treasures. If I want to compete, who am I afraid of? Take a few more. If someone tries to bully you with a magical weapon, just go ahead and retaliate." Apart from Wen Ziyuan, Yuan Yanhui, Lu Yenny, and a person called Zhu Qingsong. Black Shuttle attaining success. Apart from the disciples of the Master and disciple duo, the rest were all true disciples of the Celestial Sect of Wonders. When Elder Ji saw that all the disciples were present, he shouted, "Seal the pass." As soon as he finished speaking, a golden bell rang out from the mountain stream, and a flag gate flew out from the green mist. As soon as the flag gate appeared, the formation immediately closed, cutting off the path into the valley, and the disciples behind were no longer able to enter. Elder Ji stood up and glanced at the sky again. If the masters want to give their instructions, there's no need to delay for too long. After the inspection, the disciples can enter the valley for the competition. In the last round of the competition, the disciples had to be inspected by their teachers to see if they had been ambushed by any talisman spells or goo insects before sending them to the last door. This was because when the Qinsang school was first established, they were engaged in a fierce battle with the demons of the north of the Donghua continent. Even during the competition, the disciples had to be careful and be protected by the teachers. Now that 10,000 years had passed, Qinsang school had long become the Donghua sect, and no one dared to do such a thing. However, this precedent was still followed. After Elder Ji finished speaking, he waved his horsetail whisk, and on the peak of the mountain, a stone screen opened wide. There was a whole different world inside. He and fourth elder behind him rode the clouds in the sky and entered together. In the blink of an eye, they disappeared, leaving only 2 deacon Taoists, one on the left and one on the right, guarding the door. At this moment, the auspicious clouds in the sky dispersed, and 9 misty clouds descended. They circled around each disciple and were taken up by each of them. Lu Yenny allowed the soft mist to wrap around her as she flew into the clouds and landed on a flying couch in a flash. Zhang Yan was sitting on it. He smiled and nodded. "Yenny, let me send you off for this last round." He stretched out a finger, and a wisp of smoke flew out, lifting her up. Together with the wind, they went into the valley. After Zhang Yan sent his disciple into the array door, his gaze swept across the sky. At this moment, other than him, Elder Zhu, and another elder with the surname Hu, the rest of the core formation cultivators were all from the 5 main families and the 12 main families. However, there was no one from the preeminent clans. Among the aristocratic families, the 5 main families were the leaders. Below them were the 12 main families, and then the preeminent clans. The hierarchy was strict and stable. It seemed that the rewards obtained after the competition were not enough for the 17 families, so the rest naturally did not dare to fight for it. Zhang Yan laughed coldly in his heart. This way, every time the sect competition was held, it was equivalent to isolating the small aristocratic families. He would not believe that these small aristocratic families did not have any grievances. However, the 5 main families and the 12 main families took up about 70 to 80% of the aristocratic family's strength. Even if they wanted to resist, it was impossible. Zhang Yan turned his gaze again and looked towards Elder Zhu. In front of Elder Zhu stood 2 disciples, a male and a female. His 2 disciples had both entered the last peak, and he was satisfied. However, when he saw Zhang Yan's gaze, his breath stopped for a moment. He did not look over and only called his 2 disciples over to him to give them detailed instructions. The male disciple wore a purple Taoist robe with gold, white socks, and a pair of shoes. His hair was tied up in a high bun. His eyebrows were green, and he was handsome and tall. Even among the disciples, he was outstanding and could not be underestimated. As for the female disciple, she had a pair of conches on her head, tied with a vermilion ribbon that swayed with the wind. She was very beautiful. She wore a pomegranate-colored fairy dress with a jade-white ribbon around her waist. At the end of the ribbon was a thin silver ring with a phoenix pattern. Although she was petite and cute, her nose was straight and her eyes were spirited. She looked heroic. After Elder Zhu finished speaking, he took out something from his sleeve and gave it to the 2 disciples. In the eyes of those who were observant, they guessed that it was a treasure. However, just now, he was willing to take it out and give it to his disciples, so it must not be something powerful. For a moment, the disciples who saw this scene were shocked. Zhang Yan looked at Elder Zhu with a playful look. What kind of magic treasure did this person give out? How powerful was it? No one knew. But sometimes, it was the invisible that was the most frightening. This elder seemed to be very good at reading people's minds. By doing this in front of everyone, it was obvious that he wanted others to be afraid of his disciples and not be able to fight freely. A moment later, the 9 core formation cultivators each sent their own disciples into the formation before turning around and chatting with each other. One of them glanced at Zhang Yan and deliberately said, "Junior brother, there are some people who are born ordinary and have a shallow foundation. They overestimate themselves and want to compete with us aristocratic families. It's really ridiculous." Someone immediately followed up and said, "Senior brother Zheng is right. Think about our aristocratic families, which clan doesn't have a foundation of thousands of years? How can a person who has cultivated for 20 or 30 years be compared to them?" When Zhang Yan heard their surnames, he knew that they were disciples of the Zheng family. It was no wonder that they were so hostile to him. During the pill grading assembly, he had ruthlessly humiliated the Zheng family. He smiled and was too lazy to argue with these 2 people. He just sat and waited for the result of the competition. After an hour, the stone door opened with the sound of a drum. 8 disciples flew out one after another. These disciples were the ones who were defeated by their opponents, so they naturally could not stay in the valley for long. Senior brother Zheng was originally filled with confidence, yet his expression couldn't help but change when he suddenly noticed his own disciple was amongst them, and he stood up and cried out involuntarily. "Zheng Su, you have the protection of treasured clothes and the golden lightning nail in your hand. How could you fail?" The disciple was originally dejected, but when he heard his master's question, he couldn't help but feel frightened. He knelt on the couch and kowtowed. He said with a sad face, "Master, it's not that I didn't try my best. It's just that Lu Yenny had the 5-spirit white carp shuttle. I tried my best, but I really couldn't withstand it. 5-spirit white carp shuttle?" Senior brother Zheng almost jumped. He turned around and looked at Zhang Yan angrily. He looked like he wanted to eat the latter. Everyone knew that the Shao family's magic treasure had fallen into Zhang Yan's hands. He had even secretly mocked the Shao family a few times. He didn't expect that it would fall into his hands so quickly. First-class profound-level weapons were rare even among the 5 clans. Moreover, the 5-spirit white carp shuttle was famous. Among profound-level weapons, it was the best of the best. It specialized in breaking magic treasure restrictions. Other than true weapons, there were only a few magic treasures that could restrain it. Senior brother Zheng immediately felt depressed. No wonder those who were on good terms with him didn't send their disciples to this competition. Now that he thought about it, they must have already expected this. In the past, it was always their families who bullied their masters and disciples with their magic treasures. Why was it the other way around now? He really couldn't hold it in any longer. He angrily walked in front of Zhang Yan and said loudly, "Zhang Yan, your magic treasure is powerful today. My disciple didn't lose unjustly. However, in this world, you're not the only one with a good magic treasure. Don't think that no one can restrain you. In the competition the day after tomorrow, I'll be sure to experience your brilliance. I'll take my leave." When he finished speaking, he flicked his sleeves and left with his disciple. When Elder Zhu heard the words, 5-spirit white carp shuttle, his expression changed slightly. He stroked his beard and didn't say a word. Not long after, he seemed to have made up his mind. He suddenly walked to the side and whispered a few words in the ear of the deacon Taoist at the door. The Taoist looked at him in confusion and surprise. Seeing his serious face, he hesitated for a moment, then nodded and turned to walk through the stone door. Everyone was curious and didn't know what he said. Someone couldn't help but stand up and yell, "Senior brother, please wait. There's nothing that can't be said. What are the two of you talking about sneakily?" The deacon Taoist was different from the disciples outside. He was also an elder of Shangming Temple and came from the same lineage of master and disciple. Seeing that this person was asking so impolitely, he didn't give him any face and said coldly, "This is a private matter that Elder Zhu asked his disciples to do. In a moment, I will report it to Elder Ji. If this senior brother has any doubts, you can talk to Elder Ji yourself. There's no need to make a fuss and lose your status." "You." That person choked on his words but couldn't say anything. He snorted and sat back down. Everyone waited for another hour before the stone door opened again. This time, 4 disciples flew out of the valley with dejected expressions. Seeing that their disciples were defeated, the masters were also embarrassed and didn't want to stay any longer. They took their disciples and flew away. At this moment, only Zhang Yan, Elder Zhu, and Elder Hu were left in the sky. Elder Zhu and Elder Hu looked at each other and saw the surprise in each other's eyes. If there were no accidents, the disciples from the same lineage of master and disciple would occupy the top 4 positions in this competition. This was the first time in more than 100 years. However, as to whose disciples would take first place, they would have to wait and see. At around the same time, they heard the sound of a bell in the valley. Including Zhang Yan, the 3 of them looked up and saw 4 rays of flowing light flying out of the formation door. Target equals _blank. Although Zhang Yan had great ambitions, just now, those aristocratic family disciples were saying that his foundation was shallow. Although they were mocking him, they weren't wrong. The clear nether heavenly lake was such a large paradise. It would be a lie to say that no one coveted it. It was just that they had not found a suitable excuse. In addition, the master and disciple lineage and the celestial sect of Wonder's aristocratic families were currently fighting against each other, so no one cared about him. However, once he became one of the top 10 disciples, it would not be easy to topple him. It was just that each of the top 10 disciples had their own roots, branches, and leaves that worked for them, while the clear nether heavenly lake was only supported by Zhang Yan alone. Even if Lu Mainyang, her younger brother, and Monster Queen Jun Yu stayed here, it would still be far from enough. Moreover, they were not on his side. However, Lu Yenny was different. This disciple had excellent aptitude, was clever, and respected her master. If she could become a core transformation cultivator soon, she would be a great help to him. After helping Lu Yenny up, Zhang Yan shouted and flew on the flying couch. Not long after, he returned to the pavilion where the Wang sisters were. After landing, the Wang sisters and Tian Kun hurriedly came up to greet their master. After a short conversation, they found out that eldest senior sister had won the disciple competition. They all cheered happily and came up to congratulate her. When he was free, Zhang Yan called Lu Yenny over and asked her about the details of the battle. Lu Yenny was somewhat puzzled and said, "Benevolent master, it is strange. The last battle was supposed to be between me, Yuan Yanhui and Wen Ziyuan, but unexpectedly the two of them admitted defeat and did not fight, allowing Disciple to take first place." When Disciple asked the reason, Yuan Yanhui only said that it was difficult to disobey master's orders and refused to say anything else. Zhang Yan thought about it carefully and guessed that it was Elder Zhu's order. He secretly thought to himself, "This Elder Zhu is quite decisive, knowing that Yan Yi has an esper in her hands, she will not be able to do so. My disciple definitely can't win, so I might as well let go." Taking the initiative to retreat like this is also a gesture of goodwill. In the future, I can still save some face. But just now, when he thought of this, he suddenly thought of something else. Wait! This 5 spirits white carp shuttle was already in his hands. It was no secret in the sect. Many disciples from influential families did not come this time because they knew they couldn't win against this talisman and didn't want to embarrass themselves. How could a smart person like Elder Zhu not know about this? He must have thought that he might have lent this magic treasure to his disciple. Perhaps he was hoping for a fluke in his heart. If he didn't lend the magic treasure, then he would let his disciple fight for first place. If Lu Yenny had this magic treasure, then she would just bow her head and admit defeat. Although Zhang Yan didn't have much contact with Elder Zhu, he could see that this was not a person without a plan. With the old man's temperament, he would definitely have made arrangements beforehand. It definitely wouldn't be an impromptu decision. What he did outside the valley just now was probably just a show for him to see, to make him feel a little guilty and feel that he owed him a favor. These twists and turns, Zhang Yan's mind spun, and in an instant, he understood everything clearly and clearly. He laughed coldly. This old man was clearly playing with his mind again, and his intentions were not right. He thought to himself, "I originally wanted you to suffer a bit, but seeing that your lifespan is approaching its end, I won't look for trouble with you. Otherwise, people who don't understand will say that I'm bullying you. I'll put it on your disciple first." But the day after tomorrow was the sect competition. It seemed that this kind of thing could only be discussed after the competition. He said a few more words of encouragement to Yenny, then went to the pavilion and sat down. He held his breath and concentrated. In just a moment, he cut off all the distracting thoughts in his mind and went into a meditative state. Pan Chi Island, inside the Jade Osmanthus Palace. Priest Mo was pacing back and forth in front of the palace. He looked up at the sky and said to a young Taoist beside him, "Will Junior Marshal Brother Feng really come out in a few days?" The young Taoist bowed and said, "Senior Marshal Uncle Mo, my teacher said so." He glanced at Priest Mo and said, "Don't worry, Senior Marshal Uncle. When my teacher takes the medicine, he will be protected by joss sticks and candles. He will be fine. Priest Emo shook his head. Ever since Fengzhen learned that little divine ability from his teacher, he had been practicing it day and night. In the past 2 years, he had also gone into closed-door cultivation from time to time. However, when Priest Emo sparred with him in private, he found that he didn't make much progress. Until 3 months ago, when Fengzhen suddenly said that he was going into a closed-door cultivation, Priest Emo had been trying to persuade him. Eventually, Priest Emo could only let him be. For a closed-door cultivation like this, when a cultivator had reached a dead end, he had no choice but to take the peacefulness powder and try to find a trace of mystery in his imagination. But once this medicine was taken, he would forget about worldly possessions and wouldn't know how long he would spend. He might even be lost in the dust forever and sink into the unfounded world. It was extremely dangerous. Moreover, 3 months had passed in a flash. In another 2 days, it would be the sect competition. Duda could summon the disciples to gather at any time and head to the Honglai continent. If they didn't arrive by then, expulsion from the sect was a small matter, but it was very likely that they would lose their lives. Priest Emo and Fengzhen were close friends. It was rare for them to get along well with each other in the sect. At this moment, he couldn't help but look worried. He sighed and said, Junior Martial Brother Feng entered the Tao 10 years earlier than Zhang Yan. If we compare, his foundation can be said to be deep. Even if he couldn't comprehend this divine ability, he might not win. However, that Zhang Yan, why would he need to go into closed-door cultivation? That Priest Emo immediately lowered his head. This matter involved his own master. Priest Emo could speak, but how could he rashly comment? Priest Emo secretly guessed that Fengzhen's reckless cultivation was very likely because he was afraid of the 5 spirits white carp shuttle in Zhang Yan's hands. However, he had the clan's rare treasure in his hands, and it wasn't like this junior martial brother didn't know. Although this treasure couldn't be compared to the black shuttle, it was enough to protect himself. At worst, he could just lend it to him. Why did he have to risk his life like this? Just as he was sighing, he suddenly heard a rumble from the hall. His feet trembled slightly and a wave of heat surged out. Even with his profound cultivation, he still felt a wave of heat. Then, he heard a wild laugh. Joy appeared on his face, and with a stomp, he turned into a wisp of red smoke and entered the main hall. Inside the main hall, he landed on the ground and saw that the surroundings were filled with billowing black smoke. Even he couldn't see clearly what was going on inside. He took a sniff and felt a burning sensation invading his abdomen, burning his mouth and nose. He couldn't help but be shocked and took a step back. He circulated his cultivation to protect his 7 apertures and said loudly, "Has Junior Martial Brother Feng come out of his seclusion?" As soon as this voice came out, the smoke in the main hall suddenly moved, and then they were all thrown in one direction. When most of the smoke had dispersed, Priest Emo fixed his eyes on it and saw Fengzhen standing in the main hall with his back facing him. His sleeves were rippling and sucking in the remaining smoke and fire. Priest Emo walked up and saw that Fengzhen's hair had already turned red. He was instantly shocked and said, "Junior Martial Brother, you." Fengzhen turned around and saw Priest Emo. He laughed loudly and said, "Senior Martial Brother, the heavens have blessed me. Just now, I have completely understood the supernatural power that Master gave me. Now that I've run into Zhang Yan again, no matter what kind of superior cultivation method he has learned, I will definitely be able to take him down." Priest Emo carefully looked at Fengzhen a few times and saw that his eyes were filled with ruthlessness. Around his eyes were lines of fire patterns that slowly floated and appeared with each breath he took. It was incomparably strange, and he couldn't help but feel that something was wrong. The Xian cultivation methods and supernatural powers that were cultivated in Qinsang school were all orthodox Xian men. They had to be cultivated step by step and needed to be slowly honed. It was extremely difficult to cultivate to the minor stage in less than 3 years, and it was common sense that he couldn't cultivate it. However, Fengzhen was in a hurry to cultivate and said that it was an order from his master, so he couldn't stop him. But seeing Fengzhen's appearance, it seemed that he had taken the peacefulness powder, and his mind had been affected. Unconsciously, he walked over and carefully looked at Fengzhen. In a low voice, he said, "Shitty, do you feel that something is wrong?" Fengzhen's expression was somewhat displeased. He said, "Wrong? What's wrong?" "Humph. Junior Marshal Brother, I am very good." Priest Imo frowned and asked, "Then what kind of supernatural power did Master teach me?" Junior Marshal Brother was unwilling to tell me that day. "Can you tell me now?" Hearing Priest Imo ask about this supernatural power, Fengzhen laughed loudly and said, "The power that Master taught me is great, and can't be explained clearly with mere words. Come, let me spar with Senior Marshal Brother. Then you will know the power of this minor supernatural power." Just as Priest Imo was about to speak, he suddenly heard the sound of a bell coming from afar. He couldn't help but feel a chill in his heart. Even Fengzhen's expression tightened. Priest Imo turned his head to the west and said solemnly, "This is Master summoning the disciples from the palace to participate in the grand competition. Junior Marshal Brother, quickly pack up and follow me. Target =_blank. Chapter 324. When Taoist Imo heard the bell, he didn't have time to talk to Fengzhen anymore. He hurriedly rode his cloud and rushed to Molten Smoke Island. Fengzhen followed closely behind. The two of them broke through the clouds and chased after the wind. When the bell rang for the second time, they landed on Molten Smoke Island just now. Dozens of disciples were already standing in front of the Roaring Fire Palace. When the two of them pressed down the cloud, they walked to the front of the palace and looked up the jade steps. They saw Duda sitting high up on the steps, dressed in a plain straight robe. His hair was tied up in a high bun with a vermilion hairpin. He didn't have any accessories on him. Although there was no joy or anger on his face, the disciples below him all stood upright, not daring to make a sound. Taoist Imo and Fengzhen hurriedly came forward to greet him. Duda glanced at them casually, but his eyes only lingered on Fengzhen for a moment. He waved his sleeve and said indifferently, "The two of you, stand to the side and wait for my orders." The two of them carefully got up and took a few steps back, standing together with their fellow disciples. After that, more and more disciples came. When the second bell rang, there were already 107 disciples on the island. According to the rules of the palace, everyone had to gather before the bell rang for the third time. Otherwise, they would be severely punished. But at this time, Duda suddenly asked, "Who else hasn't arrived?" The attendant boy had already seen it clearly and knew what was going on. He immediately turned around and reported, "Master, there are still 15 people who haven't arrived." "They are," Du Qin waved her hand and said indifferently, "No need to say more. The rest will be expelled from the sect. If they dare to take a step into Molten Smoke Island in the future, they will be executed immediately." When these words came out, the hearts of the disciples below the platform trembled. They secretly thought that they were lucky. Taoist Imo and Feng Ho were covered in cold sweat. They looked at each other in fear. Fortunately, they knew that this teacher was strict with his disciples and was temperamental. That was why they rushed over. If they were a little late, they would probably end up like this too. It seemed like these disciples were all clinging to Duda, so the clan could support them. However, if they lost their master's favor and were expelled from the clan, even if they returned to the clan, there would be no future for them, and no one would argue for them. Duda stood up from the couch, his sleeves naturally dragging along the ground. His emotionless gaze swept downwards. His white robes were whiter than snow, and his figure was tall and slender. Although he looked a little frail, he exuded an imposing aura as he stood there. All the disciples in the hall felt their hearts skip a beat, and they all lowered their heads, not daring to look up. Duda took a look and said, "Disciples of the Fireworks Palace, follow me to the competition." He turned around and boarded a red-maned Shilin flying carriage. Starting the engine, in a split second the smoke and clouds dispersed and soared into the sky. After a few breaths, a loud noise was heard on the island, as if a cauldron had been opened and a cauldron had been flipped over. Sparks were flying everywhere. The disciples all got up into the smoke and followed behind. Hundreds of red lights flew out from the fiery island, bringing with them a dozen miles of black smoke, burning the sky and rushing towards Hung Lai and Lu Hong. There was still one more day until the competition, so there was no need to rush. Duda walked at a leisurely pace. When there was still half of the journey, he suddenly saw colorful lights on the horizon, and in the blink of an eye, a large cloud of wind and clouds had arrived. In the lead was a long-bearded man with a dignified appearance. He was also sitting on a flying carriage, coming from the east. Behind him, there seemed to be thousands of misty and colorful clouds. He was also followed by more than 100 disciples, each of them in a high-spirited manner. Flying lights and smoke rolled here and there, spreading out for a few miles. When the man saw Duda, his eyes lit up. He stood up and greeted, "I thought I was early, but I didn't expect Brother Du to be one step ahead of me." Duda looked at the man and stopped the flying carriage. He indifferently returned the greeting and said, "So it is Brother Xiao Sa. I heard that there is a change of master this time. As a disciple, how dare I not be the first to arrive?" Xiao Sa didn't mind Duda's cold expression at all. He laughed and agreed, "That's true. As disciples, we must do our duty and observe etiquette. Brother Xiao Sa, since we met halfway, why don't we go together?" Duda didn't refuse, and they both sat back in their chairs. The two flying carriages moved side by side. Although the disciples behind him also followed together, even though they were in a group, they were like two torrents that were clearly separated and did not interfere with each other. Xiao Sa seemed to be in a good mood. After chatting with Duda for a while, he said, "This competition is different from the past. Does Brother Du have any intention of moving your seat?" Duda calmly said, "Brother Qi doesn't need to be mentioned. For hundreds of years, no one has been able to defeat him. As for the other two brothers, their Fa Li and cultivation are far better than mine. I don't have such extravagant thoughts. However, I heard that Brother Xiao Sa's cultivation has improved. If you want, I can let you go." Xiao Sa laughed loudly and shook his head. He waved his hand and said, "Brother Du, don't joke. I am not as good as you, but I am more than enough. Why should I be greedy?" Duda coldly said, "The world is changing. Even if you want to keep your selfish side, I am afraid there will be people who won't let you have your way." Xiao Sa raised his eyebrows. His eyes flashed like lightning, and his body emitted an awe-inspiring aura. He said, "Brother, are you talking about Huang Fuzhou? Ha, this person is not bad. He is worthy to be my opponent. If he can kill his way to me, I will give him a chance." Duda said, "The master and disciple sect is pressing me. Brother Xiao Sa must have been warned by the master and should know what to do. There is no need for me to say more." Xiao Sa glanced at Duda, stroked his long beard, and muttered, "Master and disciple have indeed produced many outstanding disciples in recent years. Leaving aside junior brother Ning, I have heard that one of them managed to achieve a grade 1 Dan. This is a rare occurrence throughout the ages and cannot be underestimated." "Oh, that's right, this person seems to have killed 2 of senior brother's disciples." Duda did not answer. His eyes were deep like a bottomless pool, making it impossible to tell what he was thinking. Xiao Sa's eyes showed a hint of pondering, but then he smiled carelessly and did not continue to ask. He only controlled the flying carriage to move forward. When they reached the Hung Lai Lu Hong, the two went deep into the river. Along the way, their momentum was impressive, and the spirit beasts and strange birds avoided them. After a moment, 10 peaks appeared in the clouds in front of them, forming a circle. Each of them was majestic and magnificent. In the middle, there was only a piece of white land, piled up with a 10-feet-high earth platform. The platform was arranged according to Xian Li's odd numbers, and there were many formation flags. The two arrived in front of the peak in a flash. At this time, Duda looked in one direction. He saw that on the flat ground in the distance, the wind was endless, the dust was swirling, and there seemed to be thousands of pearls shining brightly. The smoke followed the flowing light, and the shadow flew thousands of feet. In a flash, it climbed up the sixth peak, and then slowly descended. When the dust settled, the fog and smoke dispersed, but there was a warm light, reflecting the whole peak like a pile of jade. Xiao Sa drove the flying carriage forward a little, as if he wanted to take a closer look. He knew that such a scene was not something that a single person could create. Just like them, it was a gathering of over 100 disciples. However, there was still a solemn look in his eyes as he said in a deep voice, "Zhuang Buji's cultivation has improved over the years and he cannot be underestimated. Since he is here, I believe that Luo Qingyu should have arrived long ago." His gaze turned and looked towards the eighth peak, and sure enough, he saw luxuriant foliage, clear leaves fluttering in the wind, and green mist hanging down like tassels, rippling with the wind. He couldn't help but nod, and then he looked towards the 7th, 9th, and 10th peaks. He saw multicolored light shining brightly, and each had a strange phenomenon, so he said, "Junior Marshal Sister Han, Junior Marshal Brother Su and Junior Marshal Brother Fang have come as well." Duda's tone did not change, and he said in a deep voice, "Brother Xiao Sa, let's settle down." Xiao Sa nodded, and the two of them did not say much. They each went their own way, and the disciples who were originally on the same path also went their separate ways, and followed their own masters. Xiao Sa landed on the fifth peak, and in a split second, thousands of golden lights shone, and it was dazzling, and the momentum was pressing, as if it wanted to suppress the momentum of the fifth peak. As for Duda, he landed on the fourth peak, and the whole peak was like a burning candle. A red light shot up to the sky, and dyed the clouds red, and the sky was red. With this momentum, except for the first three peaks, which were silent, the rest of the peaks could not compare. Xiao Sha sat on the stone platform on the peak. He carefully observed the fierce red light and pointed at it with his finger. He said, "Strange, Duda's disciples have made a lot of progress. I originally thought that he didn't have the heart to teach his disciples, but now it seems that there are a few who have made great progress." Behind him stood a man in a green robe, dressed like a scholar. His appearance was ordinary, but his eyes were bright. He looked up and said in a deep voice, "I'm afraid it is the master's order, so I have to obey." Xiao Sha nodded his head in deep thought. Although they, the top 10 disciples, usually had their own territory in the sect, there were always masters above them. There were some things that they couldn't do as they pleased, but if an order came down, they had to obey it. Today's competition was a chess game between the master and the aristocratic families of Xianmen. In order to gain the upper hand, they had already secretly used all kinds of methods. Not far from the 10 peaks, on the south side, there was another mountain. On top of it, there was a stargazing platform. It was carved with jade, and it was crystal clear like ice. On top of it sat a man of Daoren, who had white hair and a red face. He looked at the distant peaks, and after a while, he said in a deep voice, 7 of the top 10 disciples have arrived. Tong Er, you can go and ring the golden bell." Tong Er was stunned, and said, "Elder, spiritual master Qi has not arrived yet. Isn't it too early to gather the disciples?" Daoren smiled and said, "It's okay, you can go and ring it. I have my reasons." Tong Er did not insist. He bowed, accepted the order, and went to ring the golden bell. Not long after, a long and melodious sound of the bell rang. In an instant, it spread throughout the sect, and all the disciples of Qinsang school heard it. As the bell rang, a wisp of smoke flew out from the hundreds of islands in the vast Great Dragon Abyss Lake. They tore through the air towards Honglai and Luhong. There were also tens of thousands of streaks of light that rose into the air. Although they were slower than the flying smoke, they still followed behind them. For a moment, the flowing lights flew across the sky like stars in the Milky Way, illuminating the sky and shining down on the Great Lake. Zhang Yan was originally meditating in the building when he suddenly heard the bell ringing in his ears. His eyes suddenly opened and flashed with a bright light that was a foot long. Then, it disappeared. He stood up, and with a clear whistle, clouds and mist appeared under his feet, and a light smoke lifted him up into the sky. After slightly identifying the direction, he activated the star's sword pill, and in an instant, his body and sword became one. He turned into a shocking long rainbow, suddenly broke through the atmosphere, and flew straight towards the place where the bell rang. Target =_ blank. Chapter 325. Remember, Lu. Zhang Yan flew towards the sound of the golden bell. His sword escape technique was fast, and in an instant, he had traveled 100 miles. In the distance, he saw a valley with lush foliage and lush greenery. There was a copper pillar rising from the four corners of the valley. 4 Daoran people were sitting cross-legged on top of it, each holding a flag in their hands. From time to time, smoke would rise from the bottom of the copper pillar and converge towards the middle of the path. It was as if a net had been woven, condensing into a ball that stretched for 100 miles. It was actually a large formation. Zhang Yan stopped and looked around. In front of the valley, there was a stone tablet. Thinking that there must be a reason for it, he landed on the cloud and walked to the front of the tablet. The words on it were strange, as if there was some kind of restriction placed on it. He couldn't see it clearly from a distance, so he walked closer and looked at it carefully. After reading the words once, he knew the reason for this place. It turned out that in order to prevent the disciples from finding loopholes, the method of the competition was different every time. Maybe it was because of the battle against the 3 pools and the battle to break the formation, but in the last 2 competitions, the sect had set up formations for the disciples to break through. Only those who passed the formation could reach the foot of the 10 peaks. In the last competition, they only needed to find the exit and break through the formation guarded by the elders of the sect. But this time, it wasn't so easy. The people who broke through the formation had to pass through a total of 16 doors. Not only that, each door could only allow 1 person to pass through at a time. If the disciples who broke through the formation met each other, they would have to fight each other. The loser would have to leave the formation and follow the formation to another place. If they were unlucky, they would have to start all over again. In this way, every disciple who entered the formation could be an opponent. The more people who lost, the less chance they had of breaking through the formation. Zhang Yan was naturally not afraid. He smiled, waved his sleeves, and walked into the formation. When he looked at the stone tablet, a few core transformation cultivators came down, talking and laughing, wanting to see the stone tablet as well. He glanced at Zhang Yan and saw him standing there with his hands behind his back. However, their expressions changed and they let out a low cry. They actually hesitated and waited for him to leave. Just now, he dared to take a closer look. After looking at it, someone said with a bitter expression, "I didn't expect this person to be ahead of us. If we enter the formation now, we might have to face him." Another person immediately said, "Why don't we wait for a moment, wait until this person is far away. It won't be too late to enter the formation later." His companions all agreed with him. After Zhang Yan stepped into the formation, he saw a fog in front of him. It was as if there was a veil in front of him, and he couldn't see clearly. He leaped into the clouds and flew forward for a moment. The battle formation changed again, but he was not in a hurry. Every time he traveled a mile, he would concentrate and calculate. It didn't take long for him to see the clues. This array formation was not difficult. As long as one was willing to put in the effort to calculate and understand array theory, if no one stopped them, they would most likely be able to break through the array formation. However, if there were people fighting for the door, then it would be a different story. The door would change at a fixed time, and the slightest delay would cause one to miss it. This meant that the disciple who tried to break through the array had to defeat his opponent in a short period of time to pass. Because of this, the person who entered the array had to use all of his methods. However, there were 4 Yuaniing cultivators protecting and operating the array formation. They could help at any time, so there was no need to worry about the disciple's life being harmed. Zhang Yan couldn't help but think that this array was a test of one's temperament and cultivation. It was a good way to select the disciples. He calculated for a while more and understood the changes in the array formation. He relaxed and started to move according to the direction to break through the array formation. In a few breaths' time, he heard the sound of a gong. An array door appeared out of thin air, and clouds of mist rolled out. Just as he was about to fly inside, a shadow suddenly flashed. A person suddenly appeared from the side, as if he wanted to pass through the array door before him. If he let this person pass, then the array formation would change accordingly. Zhang Yan had to calculate again, and it would be a waste of his effort. So he laughed and said, "Senior Marshal Brother, why are you in such a hurry? Wait a moment." With a thought, a sword light cut through the air and blocked in front of the array door. If that person insisted on rushing forward, he would be cut by the sword light. This person was also shocked. He was confident that he could not be detected by others because he had the art of evading shadow. He thought that he could take Zhang Yan by surprise and break through the array door, but he didn't expect Zhang Yan's sword light to be so fast. So he hurriedly turned around and dodged the sword light. Just as he was about to counterattack, Zhang Yan raised his hand and pointed. The sword light suddenly leaped up and went straight for his face. That person couldn't take it anymore and dodged to the side. He took a step back in a sorry state, but he didn't expect that he had already moved out of the way of the array door. Zhang Yan smiled faintly and didn't want to waste any more time with him. He turned into a streak of light and rushed toward the door. Taking advantage of the momentum, he passed through in a flash. With a loud rumble behind him, the formation changed and the door disappeared. He didn't look at it anymore. He calculated the position of the next door and continued forward. After walking for less than a mile, he saw a ray of light floating like a jade spring on the ground. It separated to the sides and another door slowly rose. Before the formation door was fully formed, the sound of a drum was heard from the Sun position, and a formation door was opened. A Taoist stepped out from it, and stood face to face with him. This Taoist was wearing a bagua robe. His hair was tangled with yellow mud and his body was covered with grease. His beard and hair were sparse and his face was extremely old. When he saw Zhang Yan, he bowed and said, "Junior Marshal Brother, you're too polite. Only one of us can pass through. Please." Time was of the essence, so there was no need for both sides to introduce themselves. They only needed to fight. Zhang Yan smiled and said, "Be careful, Senior Marshal Brother." He pointed with his finger and the star turned into a shooting star. It flew straight towards Doran's head. Doran obviously didn't expect him to be an immortal and couldn't help but be shocked. However, he seemed to have a way to deal with it. He hurriedly raised his sleeve and an icy mist that radiated cold light flew out in an attempt to block the sword light. However, before the sword light could touch the mist, it made a nimble turn. In this turn, it had already avoided the treasure and came for Doran's ear. Seeing how nimble the sword light was, Doran couldn't help but be shocked. At such a close distance, he didn't have time to dodge and could only hurriedly use his Dan Sha to block. Who would have thought that as soon as the Dan Sha was activated, the sword suddenly darted out, his vision blurred and he felt a chill by his ear. Just now he saw a strand of hair fly past the tip of his nose. Only then did he know that the speed of the sword had reached an unimaginable level. He sighed and took a step back. He cupped his hands and said, "This old Taoist has lost. Shitty, please pass." Zhang Yan raised his hand and bowed. He flew inside and killed his way to the next level. This time, it was smooth. He passed 3 levels in a row and didn't meet a single opponent. However, this formation seemed to have a secret to it. The faster he went, the longer it would take him to find the next formation door. He suspected that the person in charge of the formation saw that he was going too fast. In order to prevent him from not meeting a single opponent along the way, he operated the formation so that he wouldn't be able to pass easily. Therefore, he slowed down his pace and moved forward leisurely. As expected, with this, he didn't spend much effort and found the sixth formation door. At this moment, the Kun position shook and a middle-aged Taoist with a crown and a wide belt appeared. When he saw Zhang Yan, he rolled his eyes and without saying a word, he made a hand sign. The two swords on his back rose into the air and turned into two rays of golden light, attacking downward. Zhang Yan shouted coldly and a big yellow hand appeared from the top of the door. It scooped the two swords and crushed them into a pile of scrap metal. The middle-aged Taoist turned pale and took out a golden bell. Just as he was about to use it, he felt a ray of light slashing at him. He felt a pain on his shoulder and the golden bell fell to the ground. He knew that he wasn't a match for Su Ke and quickly covered his wound and turned into a cloud of smoke. Zhang Yan took it and didn't chase after him. He waved his sleeves and stepped into the formation door. Along the way, he frequently used his skills. Whenever he encountered an enemy, he would first use his flying sword to slash. If the enemy couldn't react in time, they would immediately be forced into a fluster by him, forced to retreat, and had no choice but to get out of the way. If the opponent used a talisman to block in time, he would immediately use the 360 drops of heavy water to rain down like hail. He didn't need to do anything to the opponent, he just needed to force them to be unable to move for a moment. When the door closed, he went through the door and walked very elegantly. With his two moves, no one could stop him. Along the way, he was like a hot knife through butter and broke through another 7 formation doors. He was so ferocious that even Jinren Yuanying outside the formation could sense it. A Jinren with long eyebrows asked, "Who is this person?" "He uses a good flying sword technique. Even though he hasn't obtained a superior sword manual, I'm afraid normal disciples won't be able to stop him." These few Jinren Yuanying came from Shangming Hall. They usually cultivated painstakingly and didn't care about the outside world, so they didn't recognize Zhang Yan. Another Jinren Yuanying with a dark face and dark skin muttered to himself and shook his head, "This method is a trick. If it's too easy, the younger generation will inevitably become arrogant and it will go against the original purpose of this formation. Let me set up some obstacles for him." His words were unavoidably flaunting his seniority, but the rest of them didn't know Zhang Yan well, so they naturally didn't have any objections. This Shinran moved the formation and chose a cultivator to be Zhang Yan's opponent. Zhang Yan arrived at another door. Suddenly, a cloud of blue mist shot out from the Ken position, and a tall and handsome young cultivator came out. This person had sword-like eyebrows and starry eyes. Chapter 326. As soon as Zhang Yan appeared, he became the center of attention. He immediately felt several unfriendly gazes coming from the 10 peaks. Xiao Sha sat on the jade platform at the top of the mountain. Seeing that the person was elegant and had an extraordinary bearing, he pointed down and asked, "Who is this?" The disciple immediately bowed and said, "This is the Lord of Clear Serenity Heaven Lake, Zhang Yan." "Oh, this person is Zhang Yan?" Xiao Sha's eyes narrowed. "Is he the Zhang Yan who achieved first-grade Dan and captured nephew Bo?" The disciple immediately replied, "Yes." Xiao Sua's face darkened, and he snorted. The clan had lost a lot of face because of this person. Not only did they lose their clansmen, but they also gave away an artifact. This matter was ridiculed by the younger generation of the other clans. Although no one dared to mention it in front of him, how could he show a good face when he saw Zhang Yan? The ordinary-looking middle-aged man behind him took a step forward and carefully looked at Zhang Yan from head to toe. His eyes shone brightly, as if he wanted to see through Zhang Yan. Xiao Sua looked at him and unconsciously asked, "Junior brother Luo, is this person worthy of being your opponent?" Junior brother Luo did not reply, as if he was considering. Then he opened his mouth, but with a serious expression, he said, "This person is focused and resolute. I have never seen such a person in my life. As for how strong he is, I will only know after fighting him." Xiao Sha knew that this junior brother of his never spoke empty words. He stroked his beard and muttered, "Oh, this grand competition involves the power of the sect. The master and disciple lineage must have made some arrangements. Although my family also has countermeasures. Although our clans also have countermeasures, don't let your guard down. If this person doesn't come to pick a fight, then ignore him for now. Luo Yuanhua and the disciples behind him agreed. On the other peak, when Feng Zhen saw Zhang Yan's figure, fire marks gradually appeared around his eyes, and the evil aura on his body gradually rose. Priest Mo, who was standing beside him, was startled. Fearing that he would offend Duda by losing his composure, he grabbed his wrist and whispered in his ear, "Junior martial brother, don't be impatient. There will be plenty of opportunities in the competition. Don't lose your composure now. If master sees you, he will punish you." Feng Zhen was shocked and hurriedly focused his mind. He cast an appreciative glance at Priest Mo and whispered, "Thank you for your reminder, senior martial brother." When he saw Zhang Yan just now, he felt a surge of anger colliding in his chest, and he wanted to vent it out. He had cultivated for many years, and his emotions were usually extremely easy to control, but at that moment, he was almost unable to control himself. At this point, he only thought that it was because he had advanced too much while cultivating that little divine ability, causing his cultivation to be too fierce and causing his foundation to be unstable. He thought about it and felt that there was no need to worry too much about it. After the competition, he would go back and recuperate. When the few deacons on the cliff saw that someone had come out of the formation, one of them stood up and bowed to Zhang Yan. He pointed to the back and said, "Senior martial brother, please take a seat in the pavilion on the cliff." Zhang Yan looked in the direction he pointed and saw that there were a few flying pavilions on the cliff. The eaves were protruding and leaning against the cliff. However, the cliff he was standing on was shorter than the opposite 10 Peaks mountain. He snorted coldly and said, "No need." As soon as he finished speaking, he activated the sword pellet and turned into a ray of light that shot into the clouds. With a flick of his sleeve, he released a flying couch and sat on it steadily. The height he was sitting on was actually the same as the 10 Peaks. When the disciples on the peak saw this, they were stunned at first, then they all said angrily, "This person is too arrogant." Anyone could tell that Zhang Yan's actions were clearly showing that he was going against the 10 Peak mountain. Duda's expression was still cold, but the white robe on his body moved even though there was no wind. His gaze also became sharper, and the disciples below the jade stairs felt their hearts tremble. At this moment, on the 10th peak sat a handsome man with a jade-like face. He was Feng Zhenlu, who was ranked last among the top 10 disciples. He was the youngest among the 10 disciples, but he thought highly of himself and was the most arrogant. When he saw Zhang Yan's actions, he frowned and said unhappily, "Which disciple doesn't know the rules? How dare he stand shoulder to shoulder with us? Men." The moment he said that, a female cultivator beside him immediately walked up and whispered in his ear, "Son-in-law, the big picture is more important. Don't be impulsive." Feng Zhenlu raised his eyebrows and snorted, "If that's the case, let's not argue with him for now." The Taoist in charge was stunned for a while. When he came back to his senses, he instantly became anxious and hurriedly rode the cloud up and shouted, "Senior brother, how can you stay here? Please quickly go down with I." Zhang Yan said with a smile, "Why? Is there a rule in the sect that I can't stay here?" The Taoist in charge choked and stammered, "That's not true." Zhang Yan said with a smile, "If that's the case, I have no reason to stay here. Senior brother, please go back." The Taoist in charge felt that something was wrong, but no matter how he thought about it, he could not find a reason to refute. After holding it in for a while, he squeezed out a sentence and said, "Senior brother, since you're so stubborn, I will naturally report it to my master." Zhang Yan flicked his sleeve and pushed out a gust of wind. He said, "Go ahead." The Taoist in charge had no choice but to descend the cloud resentfully. He said he was going to report it to his master, but in reality, he was just looking for a way out. Not to mention that his words carried little weight and no one would pay attention to him, even if he did, who would bother with such a small matter? At this moment, a gust of cold wind suddenly blew over, causing his robe to flutter. Zhang Yan looked at the distant mountains with high fighting spirit. He thought to himself that this trip was for the sake of seizing the position of the top 10 disciples, and this was an open and above-board action, so why should he hide and cower at the back? At this moment, there were still 3 of the top 10 disciples who hadn't arrived, and the competition hadn't begun. Even if there were people who were indignant and angry in their hearts and glared at him, but no one was willing to go against the law and come looking for trouble with him. Even if they really came, Zhang Yan wasn't afraid. He came here today precisely to use this sturdy body to create a clear sky and fight with others, and this was exactly what he wanted. If the heart was willing, then the aura would take form on the outside. On this side, he floated alone in the sky and looked around. Above his aura, there was a kind of unyielding spirit, just like a cold blade that was unsheathed, sharp and overbearing. After the time it takes for half an incense stick to burn, the mist in the valley where Zhang Yan came from rumbled. Suddenly, there was a sound, and the array door opened. Another Taoist in white walked out with a cold expression and a heroic aura. The cold light in his eyes was like lightning as he swept through the peaks of the various families. Those who were looked at by him, those whose cultivation was inferior to him, all felt a chill in their hearts and a layer of fine goosebumps appeared on their skin. When the Taoist in white saw Zhang Yan sitting upright in the clouds, he immediately rose from the ground and transformed into a green cloud that flew up to the sky. He stood in the void and said with his hands behind his back, "Junior brother Zhang is so leisurely." Zhang Yan let out a long laugh and said, "Senior brother Ning, you need to know that the scenery here is unique." Ning Chongxian turned around and saw layers upon layers of mountains, high and low, with the 10 peaks faintly discernible in the clouds. He agreed, "Well said. Only by climbing to the top can one embrace the mountains and accommodate all rivers." While the 2 of them were chatting in the sky, there was a change in the formation below. After a few rumbles, a few people appeared. The one in the lead was Huang Fuzhou. He had a calm expression and a square face. He walked at a moderate pace. Behind him was a woman with a high bun. Her figure was graceful, but her face was covered with a layer of veil. Only a pair of beautiful eyes could be seen, making it difficult to see her true appearance. After the 2 of them came out of the formation, they only looked at Zhang Yan with slight surprise. Especially the Taoist, his eyes were slightly complicated, but he did not do anything out of line. He followed the Taoist in charge into the cliff pavilion. Junior brother Luo, who was standing behind Xiao Sha, kept his eyes on Huang Fuzhou since he came out. Huang Fuzhou seemed to feel a piercing cold gaze on his back. He pretended not to notice, but when he arrived at the door of the loft, he took the opportunity to lift the curtain and paused, as if he wanted to turn around to look. But at this moment, the woman behind him suddenly took 2 steps forward. She raised her jade arm and took the initiative to lift the bead curtain. She whispered, "Senior brother Huang, don't forget the enlightened master's order. Don't get into any conflict with the people from the aristocratic families." Her voice was soft and soft. It was very pleasant to hear, but Huang Fuzhou felt his heart tighten. He said in a low voice, "I remember the enlightened master's order." "Junior sister, you don't need to remind me." The woman nodded and smiled softly. She said, "That's good. Senior brother, please go first." Huang Fuzhou glanced at her and stepped into the pavilion without turning back. Xiao Sha looked at him and sneered, "Huang Fuzhou really doesn't give up. He came here again today. Junior brother Luo, do you have the confidence to defeat him?" Junior brother Luo stood up straight. His eyes were cold. He said in a clear voice, 45 years of sharpening my sword. I'm waiting to avenge my shame." At this moment, it was already the hour of the yin. The sky was slightly bright and the sun was rising. After another hour passed, the sun broke through the night sky and rose above the lake of Dragon Lake, and it instantly emitted a brilliant golden glow, causing the yin haze in the sky to be completely dispersed, and it was covered with fine clouds that were brilliant as if they had been dyed. At this moment, everyone was in a trance. They saw a bright light suddenly appear, as if it had leaped out from the morning sun. Following a long howl that lasted for a long time, it turned into a magnificent long smoke and flew over. It arrived in an instant and landed on the second peak in the blink of an eye. The entire peak instantly emitted rays of golden red light that illuminated the sky and circulated endlessly. Ning Chongxian took a look and said coldly, "It's Huxian." Huxian was ranked second among the top 10 disciples. Zhang Yan couldn't help but pay more attention to him. However, this person didn't come with disciples like the others. Instead, he came alone, which made him look like a maverick. The 5 major families in Qinsang school were Chen, Du, Shao, Han, and Su. The Chen family was the first major family. However, it was different from the other families. Not only did it cultivate the younger generation of disciples, but it also selected many talented disciples from the smaller families to marry into the family. Among the top 10 disciples, Huxian and Fang Zhenlu were the son-in-law of the Chen family. They were originally from a small family. Although they were talented, the road ahead was difficult. They married into the Chen family. Just now, with the support of the Chen family, they were able to make the leap. However, although Huxian was ranked second among the top 10 disciples and was considered to be the first person to achieve Yuanying after Qi Yuntian, there were quite a few people who looked down on his background. On the contrary, Fang Zhenlu was ranked last, but no one criticized him. At this moment, they suddenly heard the sound of the tide rumbling from the north. It was as if thousands of waterfalls and thousands of rivers were rushing. Ning Chongxian looked up and said loudly, "Senior brother Qi is here." Chapter 327. As soon as this voice came out, everyone looked over and saw a river flowing across the horizon. Jade ripples surged, white foam like snow. 2 malevolent inky flood dragons with golden locks on their necks dragged a inky coiled dragon python carriage, stirring up great waves as they surged forward. Qi Yuntian was wearing a Taoist robe with silk ribbons around his waist. His sleeves were as big as the clouds and his expression was solemn. Beside him was a Taoist boy who was holding a scroll. Not long after, the carriage landed on the first peak. He raised his sleeve and waved it lightly, collecting the vast and mighty water. It was as if thousands of miles of heavenly water had fallen. Suddenly, there was a loud sound, and even the entire mountain top was shaken. When he looked again, the layers of waves had already disappeared, and only the rumbling sound was left. It reverberated endlessly. At this moment, other than the third peak that was missing one person, 9 of the top 10 disciples were present. On the other 8 peaks, no matter if they were disciples or disciples, they all stood up and said in unison, "Greetings, big senior brother." Qi Yuntian stood at the peak. His body was tall and straight like a mountain. His eyes were like a torch as he looked around. His gaze paused on the third peak for a moment before he walked over and said, "Brothers, please rise." When the disciples heard this, they all stood up straight. At this moment, a girl who was riding on a crane flew over and said loudly, "Greetings, spiritual master Qi. Junior Uncle Zhong needs to go into seclusion and is at a critical moment. I'm afraid he won't be able to attend this competition." His words were loud and clear, reaching everyone's ears. Qi Yuntian smiled faintly and said, "Junior Martial Brother Zhong is diligent in his cultivation, it is our sect's good fortune. It's fine if you don't come to this competition." Among the top 10 disciples, only Zhong Muqing had not appeared in the competition for more than 100 years. He used to be a disciple of Immortal Meng, and was Qi Yuntian's senior and junior brother. They were about the same age, but their skills were slightly inferior. After the great change in the sect, Immortal Qin took a fancy to him and wanted him to be his disciple. Although Zhong Muqing was one of the top 10 disciples and had participated in many competitions, no one paid any attention to him. This was all because Immortal Qin's status in the sect was extraordinary. She was the daughter of the former sect leader. She also had the support of a few elders in the Duzhen Palace. Whether it was the aristocratic families or the master and disciple lineage, even if they could not win her over, they did not want to offend her. Fortunately, this Taoist master rarely appeared and never cared about the sex matters. If it wasn't for the 3 lake demons who kidnapped her disciple, she wouldn't have appeared on Bamboo Island. Zhong Muqing probably didn't come to the competition because of Immortal Qin's instructions. He didn't want to get involved in the dispute. For example, disciples of great clans like Huxian and Duda had long since become accustomed to this. Moreover, a single person could only occupy the position of one of the 10 great disciples for 360 years. So even if this person avoided battle, there would come a day when he or she would have to move out. After Qi Litian arrived, he seemed to have brought with him a powerful aura. The other 8 peaks were completely silent, and the aristocratic families were no longer able to chat as freely as before. Zhang Yan nodded to himself. Qi Yuntian was undoubtedly the 3rd-generation eldest senior brother. Among the disciples of the aristocratic families, there was no one who could compete with him. No wonder the master and disciple lineage only had 3 people among the 10 great disciples. But they could always gain the upper hand. He alone could suppress the crowd. Zhang Yan turned to look at the 2nd peak. It was rumored that that person was only 1 step away from the Yuanying realm. However, if he did not take this step well, his Yuanying realm would not be complete. No one knew when this person would be able to take this step. Huxian sat alone on a rock on the peak. He was silent. This person's cheeks were thin, and his eye sockets were slightly sunken. He was wearing a gray mist sun-weaving Taoist robe. He did not look very handsome, but his eyes flashed with a frightening light from time to time. At this moment, there was movement from the formation at the bottom of the valley. More than 30 transformation core cultivators walked out one after another. These people were able to break through the formation and had defeated at least a dozen of their peers. They could all be considered the elites of the Qinsang school. Ren Mingyao walked out of the formation. He was walking with his head held high, but when he saw Zhang Yan and Ning Chongxian sitting on the cloud, he seemed to have thought of something. His expression changed slightly and he stopped moving forward. Someone behind him said, "Senior brother Ren, what's the matter?" The person did not wait for him to answer. He followed his gaze and sighed, so it's senior brother Ning and senior brother Zhang. From the looks of it, these two have the intention to compete for the position of the 10 great disciples. How courageous. Ren Mingyao suddenly felt annoyed and said coldly, "Senior brother Ning has the help of Jinren's son and senior brother Qi, so he has a good chance of winning. But this Zhang Yan may not succeed. Let me ask you, which one of the people sitting on this peak has not cultivated for more than 100 years? He has not even reached the transformation core realm, but he dares to covet the position of the 10 great disciples. He is really overestimating himself." The person did not notice his expression and laughed, "Senior brother, you are wrong. It is true that this senior brother Zhang entered the Tao late, but his flying sword technique is brilliant. He also has the help of a magic treasure like the 5-spirit white carp lock. His chance of winning is small, but he may not lose. So what if he fights with those people from the aristocratic families?" Ren Mingyao snorted and turned to walk away. The reason why he was indignant was that he was also chosen by Qi Yuntian. But for some reason, the matter was left unsettled. He was just a registered disciple of Meng Zhen, not a confidant of Qi Yuntian like Fan Changqing. He did not understand the real reason was because of the battle between the two sections. Instead, he suspected that Zhang Yan had taken the seat that originally belonged to him. How could he be reconciled to this? When all the disciples were seated, Qi Yuntian ordered the boy to light up the incense burner and took out a scroll from the boy's hand. He untied the soft rope and spread it on the table. He silently chanted the incantation and a moment later, he pointed his finger and a beam of golden light shot out. Instantly, countless runes and golden inscriptions appeared and rushed up to the clouds like the green smoke. At the same time, he said, "Disciples welcome Jinren's arrival." Suddenly, a loud sound was heard from the clouds. Celestial music was heard. The sky suddenly shone with colors, thousands of auspicious clouds, tens of thousands of auspicious lights. Indistinctly, a few figures could be seen, but they were separated to the east and west. Zhang Yan knew that the Fusionren sun from the sect had arrived. But the airflow in the clouds was rolling, the light was magnificent and he could not see their faces. So he could not tell how many people had arrived. When the disciples on the 10 peaks saw this strange sign, they either clasped their hands or knelt down. They quickly bowed and shouted in unison, "Disciples pay respect to the Jinren sun." A distant voice came from the clouds and said, "Disciples may dispense with the formalities." Qi Yuntian straightened up and said, "Jinren sun, the disciples are all here. Can we start the competition? Jinren sun, please tell us." After a while, a deep and resounding voice could be heard saying, "Approved." Instantly, the forceful sound of the bell resounded once more within the dark azure sect, and it spread far into the distance and reverberated in the horizon for a long time, causing countless spirit beasts to be alarmed, and groups of them flapped their wings and flew up from the dragon lake. At the same time, tens of thousands of disciples had gathered outside the 10 peaks. They were all here to catch a glimpse of the top 10 disciples. However, they were already extremely far away from that place. Even though the eyesight of cultivators was extraordinary, they could only vaguely discern it after exhausting their eyesight. This was because their master had also entered the 10 peaks. Lu Yenyi, Qiu Hanyue, Tian Kun, and the Wang sisters stood on the flying boat and watched from afar. Lu Yenyi and Qiu Hanyue were chatting happily. Suddenly, a wisp of smoke flew over and landed on the flying boat. A graceful figure appeared. Everyone looked and saw Qi Mengjiao standing there with a smile. Lu Yenyi was surprised. "Senior sister, why didn't you go to the competition? Why did you come here?" Qi Mengjiao smiled and shook her head. "Senior sister, my cultivation is not high. If I go, I will only embarrass my master. It's better if I don't participate." Qiu Hanyue came up and held Qi Mengjiao's arm. She giggled, "It's best if you don't go. I know that you have a treasure that allows you to see the scenery 100 miles away. You must have brought it today, right?" Qi Mengjiao rolled her eyes and sighed. Junior sister Qiu guessed correctly. With a flip of her hand, she took out a silver mirror from within her sleeve. With a tap of her slender finger, a wisp of cloudy light rippled out from within the mirror, and it expanded to a meter in size. The light flickered, and it didn't take long for the current situation within Mount 10 Peaks to appear. Everyone present couldn't help but look over. At this moment, they saw a boy about 6 or 7 years old walking out from the field. However, his expression was solemn, and his actions were filled with an air of seniority. Wang Kating exclaimed in surprise, "Why is there a little kid here for the sex competition? How strange." Qi Mengjiao said in a low voice, "Junior sister, be careful with your words. This person is Suniha, Jinren Sun, the #1 flying sword technique in the sect. He is highly respected and has a profound cultivation. He is the judge of this competition." Everyone exclaimed in a low voice and unconsciously focused their attention on it. In front of the 10 peaks. Zhang Yan glanced at Ning Chongxian. Seeing that he had no intention of participating, he was thinking about whether he should go or not. At this moment, a figure rushed out and said loudly, "Meng Shishi's registered disciple, Ren Mingyao. I'm here to learn from senior brother Fang." He stood on a hawk and wore a green robe. His sleeves were fluttering in the wind. His appearance was handsome, and he immediately attracted a lot of attention. Ren Mingyao's cultivation technique was not one of the 5 techniques. Later on, he obtained a sword disc that was painstakingly cultivated by an elder of the Yuanyang sect. He felt that it was quite suitable for him to use. Therefore, he specially asked Meng Jinren to give him a more powerful cultivation technique. He believed that his cultivation was not bad. This time, he was the first one to rush out. He did not expect to defeat Fang Jinying. He just wanted to fight with his fellow disciples, and it would be best if he could defeat a few of them so that he could show some face in front of the masters. Then he would be considered to have achieved his goal. Generally speaking, unless it involved the replacement of the top 10 disciples, the top 10 disciples would not participate in the competition themselves. They would only order their disciples to compete, and they would give advice and comment on the side. This was also a custom in the sect. At least in the competition, every disciple who came to ask for advice had a much lower cultivation level than the top 10 disciples, and they were responsible for giving advice and guidance. For example, when Huang Fuzhou came to Xiao Sha, he only used words to ask him to retreat. He did not fight at all. At that time, he also made a lot of disciples admire him. However, Ren Mingyao did not expect that when Fang Zhenying heard someone challenging him, he did not want to fight. But on second thought, he did not want to be too ugly in the first round of the competition. So he waved away a fellow disciple who was about to step forward, stood up proudly and said, "I will fight him in person. You don't need to intervene. Target equals _blank." It actually charged into the inner circle. Ren Mingyao couldn't help but be happy. But in the next moment, his expression froze. That sword light had only penetrated a few inches when the hundreds and thousands of water droplets flew up one by one and struck the brilliance. It was like pearls and jade falling onto a plate, constantly emitting crisp vibrations. The sword light was immediately shaken to the point of being shaken to the side, collapsing out of shape, and without spinning, it shattered and collapsed. But this time, Ren Mingyao was shocked. He had spent a lot of effort to cultivate each of these sword lights, but he didn't want them to be destroyed here. He gritted his teeth and made a hand seal. The remaining sword lights converged into a sword rainbow that was as wide as a palm and several meters long. Then, the sword rainbow slashed down again. Fang Zhenlu's expression became a little more serious. With a thought, he took the initiative to meet the water droplets, and they collided with the sword ray. The crystal water droplets exploded, but they didn't dissipate. Instead, they gathered together as they shattered, and formed as they were destroyed. It was like countless ice crystals wrapped around the sharp sword ray. As time passed, it was gradually worn away, until it completely disappeared. Ren Mingyao's expression changed. Before he could feel the pain of losing more than 10 sword qi, the hawk under his feet suddenly cried out and was pierced by the ice droplets. Then, he saw countless ice droplets raining down on him. In a panic, he hurriedly summoned the sword plate and summoned a round of sword ray to defend. But it didn't have the slightest effect. The ice droplets were easily penetrated and dispersed. When he saw that Fang Zhenlu seemed to be unable to stop it any longer, Elder Sun, who seemed to be dozing off on the other side, suddenly raised his eyes and pointed with his index finger. A clear strand of sword qi flashed out, and in an instant, it was like the scorching sun melting snow, obliterating the water droplets. He glanced at Fang Zhenlu and said indifferently, "It's martial nephew Fang who won." Fang Zhenlu secretly sighed in pity. Ren Mingyao was disheartened and had no choice but to give up and admit defeat. He didn't expect that the method that he had practiced for so many years was easily defeated by someone else. He dejectedly bowed and said, "Thank you for your advice, senior brother Fang." Fang Zhenlu looked at him a few times and suddenly smiled. He said, "You have also fought with me once. It can be said that we have some fate. Let me give you a few words of advice. Your aptitude is not bad, and you have only cultivated for a few decades. If you can get rid of all the crooked methods that you have cultivated, maybe there will be a day when your master will value you again." After that, he flicked his sleeves and left on a cloud of smoke. He returned to the peak and sat down. Ren Mingyao listened to his words and returned to the bottom of the cliff in a daze. He sat there without saying a word. Huang Fuzhou, who was watching the battle from the cliff pavilion, saw him like this. It was as if he thought of himself back then and felt the same way. He couldn't help but shake his head and say, "It's a pity that Ren Mingyao's aptitude is not bad. If he could calm down and deal with Fang Zhenlu, he would definitely be able to fight a few more rounds. He wouldn't be so helpless." The woman beside him turned her head and said softly, "Senior brother Huang, so what? He will struggle again. In the end, he will still lose. Those who don't understand the general situation will end up like him." After Huang Fuzhou heard this, after a long silence, he couldn't help but ask, "Why does Immortal Qin want me to stop that junior brother Zhang?" The woman smiled lightly and said, "How can I know the meaning of Immortal Qin? But as long as senior brother does as you say, regardless of victory or defeat, there will be benefits for you." Huang Fuzhou nodded subconsciously. He also knew that if he took this step, he would not be able to gain Qi Yuntian's trust in the future. If it wasn't for the fact that he cared about his fellow disciples on Yangyue Island, he would not have agreed to Immortal Qin's conditions. However, he was not a weak-willed person like Ren Mingyao. Since he had already made a choice, he would not think too much about other things. That would only mess up his state of mind. At this time, in the sky, Ning Chongxian also looked at Ren Mingyao, shook his head and sighed. Junior brother Ren originally had some spirit, but now that he has been distracted by Fang Zhenlu's words, I'm afraid he won't be of much use in the future in Martial Uncle Meng's eyes. Zhang Yan nodded in agreement. As a disciple of a master and a disciple, the most important thing was temperament, followed by cultivation aptitude. And the reason why Ning Chongxian wanted him to become Qi Yuntian's disciple was also because of this. Ren Mingyao was anxious for success, and once he encountered a setback, he would lose his soul. It was no wonder that Meng Zhen only accepted him as a registered disciple and no longer paid attention to him. After Ren Mingyao and Fang Zhenlu left, another person stepped on a cloud of smoke and entered the field. This person's hair was crooked, his beard was untrimmed, and his robe was full of grease and stains. He looked extremely miserable. He picked up the wine pot and drank a mouthful. Then he tore open his robe and shouted towards the 8th peak, "Luo Qingyu, junior brother Luo, I'm here to challenge you." Zhang Yan saw that this person did not break through the formation in the valley, nor did he come down from the 10th peak mountain, but he could still stand there and shout a challenge. He was slightly surprised and asked, "Senior brother Ning, may I know who this person is?" Ning Chongxian said coldly, "This person's name is Zhou Yong." Junior brother should have heard of his name. Zhang Yan nodded and could not help but look at this person a few times. This Zhou Yong was originally married into the Chen clan, but he later heard that he was entangled with a female demon and even gave birth to a son, causing the Chen clan to be furious and order him to personally kill the female demon and her son. Zhou Yong had no choice but to kill the mother and son, but after that, he abandoned himself to despair and later stepped down from the position of the top 10 disciples. Only then did it become Fang Zhenlu's turn. Luo Qingyu's eyes flashed when he heard the challenge. He also stood up from the peak and leaped down with a green light. When Zhou Yong saw him coming down, he smiled and threw away the wine pot in his hand. Then he waved his hand and gathered all the Dan evil qi in his body at one point, releasing a thick yellow light that expanded to 1,000 feet wide. He did not wait for Luo Qingyu to stand still and brazenly collided with him. Luo Qingyu snorted when he saw this. In an instant, the green light shone brightly and the whole sky was filled with green. In the blink of an eye, the two collided without any fancy tricks. Then there was a loud explosion and a whirlwind on the ground, pressing down on the grass and leaves on the mountain. When the tens of thousands of disciples outside the mountain heard this sound, they all felt short of breath and dizzy. The two figures separated in the middle. Zhou Yong, with blood on the corner of his mouth, staggered back and panted, "Junior brother Luo, I lost." Elder Sun's eyes were calm and he said in a low voice, "Junior brother Luo won this battle." No one would have thought that the outcome of the battle would be decided so quickly. Half of Luo Qingyu's sleeve was also torn to shreds and his arm was exposed. He frowned and said, "Senior brother Zhou, you know that I have supernatural powers to protect myself, but you still use such a barbaric method. You are obviously asking for defeat." Zhou Yong spat out a mouthful of blood and then looked up at the blurry shadows in the sky and shouted, "In terms of cultivation, I am not bad, but I am not a match for your supernatural powers. I admit my defeat." After saying that, he laughed loudly and left in a cloud of smoke. Luo Qingyu's face changed slightly, as if he had thought of something, and he secretly said, "Oh no." Zhang Yan looked at Zhou Yong's figure in the distance, but his face was thoughtful. At this moment, a cold light suddenly shot out from Ning Chongshuan's eyes. He shook his sleeves and floated to the middle of the field. He looked up at the 9th summit and said coldly, "Su Wentian, I will fight you. Target equals _blank. Chapter 329. Above the 10 Peaks mountain, there was an auspicious cloud with a width of more than 10 miles. Auspicious mist covered the sky, the light was like flowing waves, and the clouds were like rolling smoke. The 4 heaven abode masters of the Yingtsang sect were sitting on the cloud, looking down at the grand competition. The person who sat on the west side was an elegant young Taoist who looked like a virgin. This was Xiao Rongyu, spiritual master Xiao. After hearing Zhou Yong's words, he couldn't help but point at him and smile. This junior has some good eyesight. Immortal Han sat on the south seat. His eyes were like shooting stars, and his appearance was elegant. He glanced down and snorted. He thinks he's smart. However, Immortal Xiao leaned back slightly and laughed loudly. He shook his head and waved his hand. Don't blame him, don't blame him. His intention is good. Junior brother Han, Ning Chongxian really challenged martial nephew Su. It's just as you expected. Spiritual Master Han snorted and said, now that the 1,000-year demon calamity is about to begin, at this juncture, what sect leader Spiritual Master wants is nothing more than to suppress us. It's not like he wants the sect to fall apart and fall out of control. Spiritual Master Han smiled and agreed, Junior brother Han is right. But what should we do in this round? Should we block the river and keep him out, or should we open the door and let him go? Immortal Du sat on the east seat. His expression was solemn and stern. When he sat there, he looked dignified and strict. When he heard what Immortal Xiao said, his eyes narrowed and 2 rays of cold light flashed. He spoke in a sonorous voice. We can't let him go. Sect leader is ambitious. If we take a step back today, we will have to take 2 steps back tomorrow. Immortal Xiao smiled and did not comment. He cupped his hands toward the north and said loudly, Senior brother Chen, what do you think? Should we defend? Or retreat? As soon as he said this, Immortal Han and Immortal Du also looked over. On the northern seat sat an old Taoist with a pale face and white hair. He was dressed in a silver-black imperial robe embroidered with orchids and held a horsetail whisk in his arms. He seemed to be resting with his eyes closed. His aura was deep and unpredictable. He lifted his eyelids slightly and said slowly, the chess piece from the past will be used today. After that, he stopped talking. Perfected being Zhao's expression changed slightly as he nodded slowly. Immortal Du said in a deep voice, as senior brother said. That's settled then. Reverend Han smiled coldly and did not say anything more. He extended his hand and pointed forward, and an item flew down to the 9th summit. Su Wentian knew the reason behind Ning Chongshuan's challenge. He stood up with a cold face and was about to descend the peak when he suddenly saw a talisman flying down and floating in front of him. He was startled at first, but then became happy. He looked around and saw that there was no one else but him. He secretly reached out to catch the talisman and hid it in his sleeve. Then, he turned into a wisp of smoke and returned to the center of the battlefield. Seeing Ning Chongxian making things difficult for Su Wentian, Zhang Yan thought to himself, sure enough. Among the top 10 disciples, the Xianmen aristocratic families occupied 6 seats. Ning Chongxian had thought about which one he would challenge in advance. Among the 4 immortals of the aristocratic families, only Su did not have immortal Dongtian. It was said that he passed away because of an accident more than 100 years ago. In this way, choosing Su Wentian could not only avoid a direct confrontation with the immortal Dongtian behind the other disciples, but also Su Wentian was ranked 9th, just below Luo Qingyu. His cultivation was not far from Ning Chongshuan's, so he was the most suitable breakthrough point. No one would miss this opportunity. However, Zhang Yan also knew that although it looked like this on the surface, how could the sect leader's intention be so simple, since he could gradually reverse the decline of the master and disciple in the sect within 100 years. Just like how he seemed to be aggressive when he destroyed several small clans in succession, but before the grand competition, he remained silent. This advance and retreat actually had a deep meaning. First, he made a show of force, then he made a concession. Obviously, he wanted to tell the aristocratic families that the next step was to continue to be aggressive or to end it peacefully. It all depended on their choice in the grand competition. Zhang Yan looked at the two people in the field and thought, this is the key. If the aristocratic families took the initiative to retreat and let Ning Chongxian successfully defeat Su Wentian, the mountain gate would be peaceful for a period of time in the future. But if there were any changes in this battle, would the master and disciple be willing to let it go? He was afraid that there would be some kind of storm. In order to win the position of the top 10 disciple, Zhang Yan also had some plans in his mind and thought of various countermeasures. Now he was waiting for the opportunity to act. As long as the situation of this battle was clear, he could make a decision. Thinking of this, he calmed his mind and carefully watched the battle between the two people in the field. Su Wentian's chin was slightly protruding, his nose was high, his eyes were long and slender, and his ears could be seen. Although he was not ugly, he had a strange appearance. After he and Ning Chongxian bowed to each other, he swayed his body and retreated 300 feet away. The technique he cultivated was one of the 5 techniques, the Azure Spirit Manifestation Technique. This technique was extremely tough when fighting with others, and it was not easy to lose. However, it had a flaw, and that was if he didn't cultivate it to a high level, his attacking methods would be slightly weak. He often heard of Ning Chongshuan's reputation, but he had never fought with him. Therefore, he decided to test his opponent's strength first. He clapped his hand and suddenly a green gas flew out, converged into a green ball and fell down. Ning Chongshuan's body did not move, but a cold look appeared in his eyes. From the top of his head, a sword light flew up and made contact with each other. There was a sound of a rope saw, and in the blink of an eye, the green gas was torn into pieces. The sword light flashed and went out another few hundred feet, and just now it disappeared without a trace. Su Wentian was a little surprised. Although it was just a casual attack with the intention of testing, he was surprised to see that Ning Chongxian took it so easily. He unconsciously raised his eyebrows and secretly became vigilant. Ning Chongshuan's Thousand Cloud Sword Sutra was a killing technique, and it was best at attacking the enemy. Naturally, he was not willing to let his opponent use it. With a shout, a smoke flew out from the top of his head and instantly condensed into a cold sword chi. He pointed it down and it shot down like rain. Su Wentian let out a "ha" and shook his body. A series of whistling sounds could be heard as countless green lights appeared on his body. They turned into green ropes that swayed in the air and collided with the sword chi. Although some of the ropes were cut off, they regenerated quickly and recovered in an instant. Ning Chongshuan's expression was calm, but his eyes were piercingly cold. His body did not move, but with a change of his mind, there was a sword chi flying out. As this sword technique flew, there was only a flash of light, and a ravine was plowed in the green gas. It was extremely sharp. Su Wentian's expression was calm. He didn't dare to underestimate his opponent, and he carefully circulated his profound arts. Under the pressure of the sword lights that were like pouring rain, the clumps of green lights advanced wave after wave, unceasingly slicing and regenerating. They were like grass that couldn't be cut off, and there was no end to them. They firmly protected the inner circle, and there was no way for them to lose. After fighting for a while, Ning Chongxian suddenly pinched the technique, and a blurry sword shadow suddenly flew out from his back. Like a flying arrow, it flashed and appeared in front of Su Wentian. This came so suddenly that Su Wentian was shocked. He only felt a chill on his face, and a sense of danger rose in his heart. But his reaction was also fast. He suddenly moved his Xian Qi, and the green light instantly turned from soft to hard. There was a solid green giant shadow that rose up, like a pillar, and hit the sword light. Suddenly, there was a muffled explosion, and his eardrums hurt. It took him a while to recover just now. Su Wentian was secretly shocked, and could not help but think, this Ning Chongxian has only entered the realm of collapse for about 20 years, but he has already broken through the acupoint. This is really unbelievable. No wonder Sun Jinren thinks so highly of him. Fortunately, he has not condensed his mana and true seal, or else he would not be able to deal with it so easily. Seeing that the opponent could not break through his Xian Qi, he was not in a hurry. He let the sword light move back and forth above his head, and secretly waited for an opportunity. After defending for a while, he suddenly felt that the opponent's sword Qi was slightly weaker. He knew that it was time for the opponent's power to weaken. His eyes suddenly sharpened, and he activated his Xian Qi. Green Qi spread out, and spots of clear green light scattered in the air. Not long after, there seemed to be countless fireflies and candles within a radius of a mile, twinkling like stars, like thousands of lanterns hanging on the wall. Then, he let out a low shout, and the hundreds of thousands of lights suddenly gathered like bees and ants, and unceremoniously counterattacked Ning Chongxian. Ning Chongxian saw that the light from all directions was like weaving a net, and it kept coming at him. He leaped up, and actually turned into a sharp clear light, and used the sword Qi to escape. With just one dash, he tore the green net apart, and went out of the circle, and could not be restrained at all. Ning Chongxian and Su Wentian's fierce battle only lasted for a short while, but they also tested each other's depth, and knew that the opponent could not be defeated by radical means. Both of them were successful in their Xian Qi cultivation, and when they saw that this method was different, they changed to a steady method at the same time. While carefully defusing the attack, and protecting themselves, they patiently looked for flaws, and waited for an opportunity. The battle went back and forth, from the end of the morning to the beginning of the afternoon, but it was still difficult to tell who would win. Both of them were cautious, attacking and defending, and it seemed to be as gentle as water, and not very intense, but Zhang Yan could see that it was actually more dangerous. Both of them were secretly preparing to attack each other. Once one of them revealed a flaw, it would be immediately caught by the other party. In fact, victory or defeat was only a matter of time. The disciples watching the battle on the 10 Peaks mountain could also see the mystery in it, and they all watched attentively, without blinking. At this time, the sun gradually moved to the west, and dusk was approaching. Su Wentian moved carefully, and secretly held the talisman in his palm. Ning Chongxian pointed out the sword Qi with one hand, and the other hand was always behind his back, as if he was also preparing for something. When the hour of the afternoon and the hour of the evening met, just when the sun was about to set, and the sky was about to turn dark, both of their eyes flashed, and they moved at the same time. Ning Chongxian suddenly let out a cold shout, and said, "Kill!" A 5-foot-long flying sword flew out from his sleeve, and the blade was like autumn frost, with a bone-chilling aura. It turned into a rainbow, and suddenly fell. Su Wentian stared, and threw the talisman in his hand. He also made a gesture, and shouted, "Go!" The talisman flew in the air, and there seemed to be something breaking out of the cocoon inside, and suddenly broke free from the shackles. Then, a pool of autumn water appeared like an arc blade, and as soon as it appeared, the burning light covered the sky, and it was blinding. Elder Sun was originally in a daze, but when he saw this thing, his face changed, and he blurted out, "Morning God Blade." At this moment, because both of them attacked too quickly, it was already too late for him to stop them, and so he almost hit his opponent at the same time. With a "chi" sound, where the sword rainbow passed, Su Wentian's head flew up into the sky. As for Ning Chongxian, after an arc of light flashed, he was also cut in half at the waist. Chapter 330. The fierce battle between Su Wentian and Ning Chongxian was also beyond everyone's expectation. Seeing both of them being killed at the same time, it immediately caused a wave of exclamations. It should be noted that the two of them were outstanding talents in the sect, rising stars of the younger generation. Both of them were hard to come by in 100 years, especially Ning Chongxian, who was Immortal Sun's favorite disciple. If he died, wouldn't it cause a fierce fight between the aristocratic families and the disciples of the sect? Thinking of this in their minds, many people in the field turned pale and panicked. But there were also many people in the field who remained silent. They stood there without saying a word, but their eyes kept flashing. No one knew what they were thinking. Zhang Yan's eyes were deep. He didn't say a word, but just stared at the field. After Su Wentian's head flew up, it floated in the air. But strangely, there was no blood, and there was no panic on his face. Instead, he looked calm. Suddenly, a green light burst out from his broken neck. It was as soft as oil, like green jade cream. It rushed up and pulled the 6 young chief leaders' head back to his neck. After it was put back in place, the green light flashed again, and the wound faded away, returning to its original state. He wriggled a little, reached out to touch it, and let out a long breath. Just now, Ning Chongxian was beheaded. From his broken waist, wisps of green light flew out, pulled the upper half of his body down, and then the upper and lower body merged together. In an instant, he was healed. There was a flash of light on his clothes, and the cut was wiped away. He waved his sleeve and formed a seal. With a flash of light, he summoned the magic sword back and put it away. After putting it away, he stood in the void with his hands behind his back. His face was still cold, and there was not the slightest change in his expression, as if nothing had happened. Everyone present was stunned. The Wang sisters and Lu Yenny, who were watching the battle through the silver mirror, were also stunned. After a while, Qiu Hanyue suddenly reacted. She pointed at the mirror and pulled Qi Mengjiao's sleeve. She said anxiously, "Senior Sister Qi, is this?" Qi Mengjiao sighed. She was a little nervous just now. If Ning Chongxian died, it would really cause turmoil in the sect. She thought for a moment, then nodded and said, "That's right, this is one of the 12 magical powers of my Qinsang school. Void Life Qi. Once this technique is completed, as long as there is still a breath of vitality, even if the limbs are torn into pieces, you can use your divine ability to pull them back. As long as you can reconnect them in a short period of time, you will not be injured and will not die, just like how you were in the beginning." Although she said it lightly, the scene of the Wang sisters being chopped off at the waist and having his head cut off gave the Wang sisters a great shock. Just thinking about it made them tremble in fear. His chest was stuffy and he was short of breath. Not to mention the fact that the two of them dared to test the law with their own bodies, they even acted as if nothing had happened. Just how strong were their wills? Wang Kating asked timidly, "If Master were to face such a person, Senior Sister, do you think he would?" Tian Kun suddenly snorted angrily and interrupted her, saying, "Shut up, Master won't lose." In Wang Kating's impression, Tian Kun had never spoken so harshly. At first, she was frightened, but then her eyes reddened and she said in a wrong tone, "Why are you being so fierce?" "I'm just worried about Master." Wang Kaiwei also bit her lower lip, a trace of worry appearing on her face. Lu Yenny frowned. At first, she didn't have a clear idea of what kind of opponent her master would be facing. She also didn't have a clear understanding of the previous 2 battles, but now she had a deep understanding. None of the top 10 disciples were ordinary people. If they were unlucky, they would lose and die. Thinking of this, she couldn't help but worry, saying, "I wonder if Master can win this kind of opponent?" But looking at the Wang sisters' expressions, she was shocked again and secretly blamed herself. As the eldest senior sister of the school, how could she have panicked first? A slight smile appeared on her face. She stretched out her jade arms and hugged the Wang sisters, one on the left and one on the right, comforting them softly. "How can we estimate Master's cultivation? Junior sisters, just watch at ease." When the Wang sisters saw that her expression was relaxed and her tone was filled with confidence, they felt slightly more at ease. At this moment, Elder Sun's expression recovered slightly. He shouted at the two and waved his sleeves, saying, "There's no winner in this round. If you want to continue, go back and rest first and wait for tomorrow." He shook his head again. It was also because he was too worried that he was panicking. But on second thought, even if he couldn't make a move, there were still a few true masters of grotto heavens in the sky. How could they allow their disciples to be hurt? He also came back to his senses now. That strike was probably just a strand of saber chi sealed by the morning god saber using the talisman. These weapons were all arrogant and not easy to talk to. Even the true masters of grotto heavens treated them politely and treated them as equals. Why would they be willing to serve a junior? Su Wendian smiled at Ning Chongxian, his eyes sparkling. "Junior brother Ning, I didn't expect you to have mastered this supernatural power." Ning Chongxian said plainly, "I've just learned it, I'm far from senior brother Su." The two stared at each other without backing down. They gave each other a fist salute and went their separate ways. Ning Chongxian went back to the cloud. Zhang Yan took out a talisman and pointed at it. It turned into a soft cloud and floated down. He said, "Senior brother Ning, just now, you must have consumed a lot of your chi of vitality. Why don't you sit down and rest for a while?" Ning Chongxian nodded at him, sat down, and began to regulate his breath. Zhang Yan looked into the distance. After the battle between Ning Chongxian and Su Wendian, he also figured out that Zhou Yong's words just now were not without reason. When Zhou Yong and Luo Qingyu fought, Luo Qingyu was not hurt at all. He only lost a sleeve, but Zhou Yong vomited blood and retreated. Although Luo Qingyu was no longer one of the top 10 disciples, his skills were not that bad. There was no reason for Luo Qingyu to win so easily in such a head-on collision. It was just that the two of them separated right after they met and not many people saw it clearly at that time. But Zhang Yan saw it clearly. The real reason was that Luo Qingyu managed to injure Zhou Yong severely at the cost of one of his arms. But then he reattached it with a supernatural power. Therefore, Zhou Yong loudly said that it was not that he did not try his best, but that he was helpless in the face of the supernatural power. This was probably a warning to the disciples of the aristocratic families that Ning Chongxian was likely to use this supernatural power as well. If they were to fight later, they should be careful. When Ning Chongxian was in the mystic light realm, the skill he practiced was of the metal and wood attribute. As for the void origin life chi, it was a wood-type ability, so he would most likely be able to learn it in a short period of time. Zhou Yong must have noticed this as well, which was why he used the opportunity of defeat to warn him. However, in this competition, there were a few grotto heaven masters competing. If Zhou Yong could think of it, how could they not? Zhang Yan shook his head. Whether Zhou Yong was sincere or not, or for some other purpose, it had nothing to do with him. He was too lazy to think about it. After a while, Ning Chongxian finished adjusting his qi circulation and stood up in high spirits. His eyes were shining, and he said confidently, "Su Wentian's trump card is gone, but I still have a trick up my sleeve. If we fight again tomorrow, I can definitely beat him." Zhang Yan smiled and said, "What senior brother Ning used just now was the void vitality of the sect, right? It really has the ability to reattach limbs. I thought it was an exaggeration, but after seeing it today, it is indeed a supernatural power." Ning Chongxian shook his head and said, "If I can kill you once, I can kill you twice. And this skill consumes a lot of qi. I can only use it in this competition because I am under the protection of the masters. If I were to fight with the demons, how could I be so calm?" Zhang Yan nodded in agreement. He had also traveled the world before, and when he fought with an enemy, it could be said that the situation was ever-changing, and the slightest bit of carelessness could lead to defeat and death. If one's body or limbs were severed, they would immediately lose the ability to fight back. Even if there was a way to prolong life, what could it do? But if he met an unknown opponent, at the crucial moment, he could take the enemy by surprise and exchange injury for life. Just as the two were talking, Another person jumped out of the valley and entered the field. This person's body was more than twice the size of an ordinary person. His eyes were like an eagle's, and there was a faint divine light when he looked around. He had a short and thick beard under his chin, and on his head was a purple gold crown. He was wearing a light green robe, and the edges of the golden armor could be seen. He was wearing a pair of beast-swallowing high boots, and he held a black dragon cloud-scraping staff on his back. As soon as he entered the field, he looked around as if there was no one else around. There was a burst of whispers. Not to mention the masters and disciples, even the people from the aristocratic families did not know who he was. They could only ask the people around them, "Who is this person?" A disciple who knew said, "This is Sui Hong from the Su clan. In terms of seniority, he should be senior brother Su Wentian's nephew." Hearing Sui Hong's name, everyone thought of him just now. But this person was always out killing demons, and rarely stayed in the mountain. Now that he had opened a house in Shenjin River and was recruiting disciples, it was even rarer to see him. They did not expect that he would come to this competition. The disciples couldn't help but be excited. This person was famous, and they couldn't help but want to see how strong he was. After Sui Hong entered the field, he looked up, and his eyes moved to the 8th peak. He glanced at Luo Qingyu's face, and then passed by. Luo Qingyu had already left the arena, and if they were to fight again, they would have to wait until the next day. However, he would be able to spar with the disciples of his sect, and he had no interest in doing so. He turned his gaze and looked at Zhuang Bufan. The surrounding disciples couldn't help but feel nervous. No matter how they thought about it, Sui Hong could only challenge Zhuang Bufan to a duel. As for Qi Yuntian, no one dared to challenge him. Even if the other 9 disciples joined forces, they wouldn't necessarily be his opponent. Sure enough, Sui Hong's eyes were fixed on Zhuang Bufan's face. Some of the disciples' palms were already sweating. The battle just now had shocked them. If Zhuang Bufan entered the field, what kind of fierce battle would the two of them have? Zhuang Bufan's eyes looked down, and a cold light flashed in his 4 pupils. To everyone's surprise, Sui Hong's lips curled into a mysterious smile. He then shifted his gaze away and turned around to look at the other peaks. His action confused the crowd, and they couldn't understand. What was this person trying to do? Was he trying to compete with the disciples of the aristocratic families? Was he crazy? Sui Hong's eyes swept past Huxian, Du De, Xiao Sha, and finally stopped on the 7th peak's Han Siyi. She was the only female cultivator among the top 10 disciples. She was beautiful, and her skin was smooth like jade. Her body was graceful, but there was a hint of bitterness in her eyes, and she looked weak. Sui Hong sighed in admiration and said, "She is a beauty." His words were bold and frivolous, especially to one of the top 10 disciples. Everyone was stunned and speechless. However, Han Siyi didn't get angry when she heard this. She just looked at him and calmly said, "Nephew Su, you flatter me." Sui Hong laughed out loud and tugged at his outer robe, revealing his golden aquatic dragon chainmail. He turned his head around and looked towards the 9th summit. When he opened his eyes, he said loudly, "Third uncle, your nephew is here to seek guidance from you." His words caused the crowd to go into an uproar. Everyone had different thoughts. What did Sui Hong mean by this? Could it be an internal strife within the family? Elder Sun frowned. He couldn't figure out what was going on either. He stepped forward and rebuked, "Sui Hong, martial nephew Su has just fought. He can't fight again today. If you want to learn from him, wait until after he and martial nephew Ning decide the victor tomorrow." Sui Hong didn't say anything. He just smiled at Su Wentian. Su Wentian took a deep breath and stood up in front of everyone's surprised eyes. Then he said calmly, "There's no need to fight. I've already fought against my nephew, and I've lost 9 out of 10 battles. I'm not his opponent, so I'll just admit defeat." As soon as these words were spoken, the entire place instantly became so silent that a pin drop could be heard. You're tuning in to the Blissful Bookshelf YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.